We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. The smoky air is back in my area, so I didn't even hear anything about it on the news like a new fire. But I was like,
they get tired of reporting on the same thing over and over again. So while some people's houses get covered immensely on the news, such and such house was burnt to the ground. A couple of weeks later, they're like, "Yeah, we're not sending news crews out."
Something, yeah.
Sucks to be you. Your GoFundMe is not.
spell.
Oops, I just kicked the camera.
You did.
Your
kick
GoFundMe is not going to hit its goal.
I guess not.
Sorry.
But anyway, that's what's going on in my neck of the woods. How about Tom?
Not a lot. I don't usually cycle on Tuesdays anymore because the cycling group is slow. It's a slower group.
Tom's just too advanced for all of those people.
And those happen to be the days that my son, like my youngest son, needed a ride to school. So it kind of, I got used to having Tuesdays and Thursdays off, which is the slower days and the days he needed to ride to school. And then, but this morning, my middle son, who started cycling without me, wanted to go cycle with the group and kind of try it out. So he went and cycled with the group, and so annoying. I don't really care that what speed we go. I really don't care. Yeah. As long as it's not too fast for me. I don't care. There is no too slow. I just end up being with it. But somebody at the front of this group, and we were kind of towards the front, him and I, and he was right behind me because then I could signal. I knew I would signal to him because a lot of people in this group don't signal because everybody in the group has done this route a bajillion times because they're all retired people, retired Floridians or whatever. So they've all done it a million times, and so they don't signal or call out anything. So I was riding in front of him, and he was giving actually a little bit more space than I thought he needed to. I thought he was kind of giving quite a bit of space between me and him. Which is fine. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. But somebody at the front of this group slammed on their brakes, which is never a good look for a group of probably 30 or 40 cyclists. Right. And so we were doing about 19, and we went down to 15 in a heartbeat. And so I had to hit my brakes, and I always, I can't say always. I usually call out when something like this happens, saying, slowing. I'll scream out, slowing. And I'm quite loud. I don't know if you guys have noticed. I've got a voice that carries.
He's got a voice
that
carries.
So slowing. Yeah. My son slowed down behind me. The people behind him slow down. And the way these groups work is everything's exponential. So if you speed up 1 mile an hour in the front, by the end of the group, they're having to sprint as hard as they can because of how the slinky sort of works here. Well, the slinky worked where I went from 19 to 15, and I was only about seven riders back from the front. And somewhere behind us, it went to 0. and somebody hit the ground. Somebody slammed into the back of somebody else. So when I texted you and said, I'm going to be late, we were all sitting on the side, and there's a massive group, and they were all surrounding this guy, blah, blah, blah. And my son came up to me and goes, I think I caused that. He goes, I think I hit my brakes too hard. I'm like, listen, my man. Even if he had run into the back of you, which he did not, it would not be your fault.
Right.
Everybody's responsible for their front wheel, right? And I'm like, this is he's the first time he's ever been with a large group like this. I've been cycling with this group for a couple of years now, maybe 3. And this is only maybe the second time somebody's hit the ground, maybe the third. The first one, I know for sure somebody hit sand as they were going around the corner and slid out.
That'll do it.
And we were by a golf course, so everyone should know that to be looking for sand, whatever. And the other time, I don't remember what happened, but if there was another time. So it just so happens when he's there. So I was like, oh my God, we're going to be stuck here, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, well, and this guy came up and I knew and started talking to me, and I'm like, I got to get going. I got a meeting I got to get to. And he's like, well, let's just go me and you. I go, well, I got my son, and this is his first group ride. He goes, that's fine. We can make a small group. So we started off, and this guy knows me, and I've cycled with him before. Mm-hmm. So we're supposed to be going 19 or 18 really with this group. And he immediately slams it up to 21, and my son's just absolutely dying. He's like, are we going fast? I'm like, I mean, we're going a little fast. And next thing we know, people like they saw us going, so they started up. Okay. It was just the three of us, and all of a sudden I've got like 10 guys behind my son. I'm like, oh God, he's already nervous about this one. So it ended up being fine. We ended up getting back in a reasonable time, which is why we're not starting too late. But it just figures, right? The first time you get your wife to sit down and really enjoy a Marvel movie, or like the first time I took my wife to the movie theater for a Marvel movie, Avengers 2. Okay. It couldn't have been a worse Marvel movie to take her to be honest with you, because it required you to remember things from other movies. Yeah. And it wasn't really all that great. No offense. It
certainly isn't the strongest of the Marvel movies of the Avengers series, no.
And we walked out, and she just went, I have no idea what happened in that movie.
That's fair enough, honestly.
Honestly, I'm not even sure I know what happened. I've seen it a couple of times now. So it just always figures that stuff like that would happen. But anyways, Rob, speaking of Marvel movies,
indeed,
whatever we watched this week.
Yeah, so I watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which of course came to Disney+.
As did I.
Okay, well there we go. We can have a discussion about this thing and not worry about spoiling it between the two of us, although we won't do any sort of heavy
Everybody
spoilers
else
for people.
Could just fast forward and spoil away.
I had originally intended to see this in the movie theater, but just somehow never got around to it, and so
I doesn't sound like you at all. Honestly,
I was happy enough to see this at home on Disney+. I did watch the IMAX Enhanced version, of course. Went into the choices there and made sure to do that.
I feel like it defaults to that on mine.
It very well might.
Does it not default? I do the same thing. Yeah. I go and look for it, but I feel like it defaults to that.
It probably does. I double checked anyway, so I don't know because I didn't just press play and see what happened. So honestly, did you particularly notice the aspect ratio changes going on? I mean, I know there were some, but it was not super noticeable.
I never saw it. Yeah. I never saw it once. Never once did I notice that there was an aspect change.
It didn't in fact, click in.
It, for me, until you said IMAX Enhanced, I had forgotten that there was even such a thing. I had just watched the movie.
So in a way, they must have done that well, right? They hit it in transitions or something where it was not in any way noticeable, take you out of the picture for even a moment. I certainly didn't make any sort of I specifically looked for it at one point to see if there were changes. I was like, okay, yeah, there was a change in the aspect ratio. It did exist, but yeah, it was well managed. I thought
I agree.
On that front. So before we get into any thoughts about the movie of it itself, the plot and the characters and all that, just on the technical aspect, did you also find that it looked different from the previous two? Everything looked more brightly lit than the previous two Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And
I would say that they have gotten more brightly lit as they've gone on.
Yeah.
I would say that the second movie was definitely a brighter movie because when you got to the Ego Planet, there was definitely a lot more, it seemed a lot lighter and more pastel-y in colors.
Yeah.
And this one definitely seemed a lot more brightly lit.
It did. But I mean, to the point that, I think I have to give a lot of credit to the makeup and costume teams because it wasn't as though I was seeing makeup seams, where people have prosthetics on or something. They did an excellent job, but I thought it was lit to the point of it's almost starting to look like actors on stage with excellently applied makeup as opposed to having enough contrast and shadows to remove the artifice of it. I don't know, it was on that borderline for me where I was like, man, this is starting to be almost looks like behind the scenes footage. It's so not
I don't think
contrasty.
I felt that way during it, but
okay.
I can tell you that I felt like it was there wasn't a lot of what I would say shadow detail in this thing. There was just sort of you could see everything, and I, to a certain extent, I enjoy that. I remember I saw the original Batman, Michael Keaton Batman in the theaters, and we all walked out and went, I mean, I could barely see anything in that movie. I mean, as far as especially fight scenes, it was just a blur of, I don't know. I think it sounded like he punched somebody.
I mean, hey, Batman Begins had a bit of that too, because
it did. But I mean, that was when, to me, that's when that really started. Was that first Batman movie? You're like, geez, I don't think they know how to film action, because they seem to be trying to cover it up, because they were like, we can't do this very well, so let's just make it fast and get it over with.
Yeah,
but this one, you really saw everything for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not sure on a technical level, like if it had anything to do with the particular cameras being used, which I would suspect a little bit less. If it was purely lighting and cinematography choices, or if some of this movie was filmed on the volume, I don't actually know. Just all of it had a bit of that look to me where I was like, we're teetering on the edge, in my opinion, of like starting to look like people on a stage. And yeah, I'm not. I never once. I love that.
I will say I never once felt there was no moment that I was taken out of this movie.
Okay.
So I never looked at a character and thought, "Oh, that's makeup," or anything along those lines. Because that's definitely happened before.
Oh, sure,
in movies for me, where you're looking at somebody like, that's clearly a prosthetic, or that's clearly this, or clearly that. This, I guess if the suits that I don't even know what they were called. The bad guy. They would call them bad guys on the living planet thingy.
Okay, yeah, the very ridiculous organic spacesuits.
The organic
that they were wearing,
armor just looked. That was the one thing that I was like, "That's." I know what they're going for here.
Well,
I understand
it was meant to be humorous, so
it was, and I'm fine with that. But it didn't look. I mean, it just looked like a big puffy.
It sure did.
Which is fine. But it was that was the only moment where I was like, I don't really like. I felt like it should that little touch of CGI in there would have.
Well, I'm sure there probably was a CGI sheen on a lot of things, but
I'm sure there was.
Yeah. So, I mean, the movie overall, I would peg this out of the trilogy if we just consider the three Guardians of the Galaxy movies as a trilogy. Although you kind of have to have seen at least which one did Gamora go in? One of the Avengers Endgame or Infinity War? War, right? You would
Endgame. Infinity War, yes. Infinity War, where where he throws her off.
You would have at least had to have seen that to have the full story going on there. But as a trilogy, I would peg this as my second favorite. I still like the first one the best. I like this better than the second,
hard not
than
to
Volume
like the
2.
First one the best.
I think so.
It's like that one came. It was such a departure from Marvel of how they made movies. It's very hard to look at the first one and not.
The humor in Volume 1 landed like every joke, and this one was probably the least overtly funny, I would guess, although there was quite a bit of humor, but they relied a lot on Mantis and Drax to provide the humor.
Yes.
And nobody else was really that funny, I guess.
I don't know. I find Karen Gillan hilarious as Nebula, and when Peter looks at her at that one moment, and she's like,
that is
"Stop! What are you looking at?" I was like,
so yeah. I mean, this is
I would agree with that. I would say I definitely like this one better than 2.
Okay,
I got no problems with that. I think it's a very good wrap up of the whole series.
I was quite satisfied with it. Yeah, I thought they did a nice job there.
Yeah. So as a whole, I felt it was a good. It kind of bookended everything just fine, and you have the ability to certainly. And then the Guardians of the Galaxy is one of those superhero groups where the members change often.
Absolutely, so in the comic books.
In the comic books, and I've never read the Guardians of the Galaxy comic book, so I mean, I just know that to be the case because I've seen enough people talking about it or read enough things about it. Mm-hmm. So I like that they kind of left it open for, hey, we can make another Guardians of the. There's still going to be Guardians of the Galaxy. They're just going to be different people and all of that. I don't necessarily love how they treated Adam Warlock.
That was going to be the thing. Yeah. I mean, the way that they teased his creation at the end of Volume 2, and so I mean, with the assumption being he'd be the big bad, or
well, in the comics, he is the antithesis to Thanos. He is the one that fights Thanos. Yeah. So I kind of expected to see him in the Infinity Endgame saga sort of thing. I expected him to show up there, to have him show up the way he did here, I was like, I mean, it was fine. As far as the movies go, like I can compartmentalize the movies because basically Adam Warlock in the comics is like space Jesus. I mean, he just can do like everything.
He's
magic.
Pretty close to a Superman character in the MCU. Yeah,
and there's quite a few of those, and that's boring to me. That's quite boring. So to have them go, we're going to do something different with him. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Except the MCU has done this alternate take on many characters many times, and they did it again.
Felt like we could have done a little bit something else.
Everybody in the MCU seems to get powered down, and they seem to get considerably dumber. And therefore much less of a threat than they are in the comic books.
And I actually, from a writer standpoint, I think that's the way to go.
I guess so.
We might not like that as, like, oh, but they're supposed to be this ultra powerful and they've made them so weak. It is boring to write Superman. Superman, every story has to be about him either losing his powers or his power, he can't use his powers for some reason. And that's not what people want to see. So the other option is to reduce his powers or reduce the powers of the comic book character to the point where they're not just like, I snap my fingers and the reality changes, which is what what Scarlet Witch can basically do.
Yes.
And they powered her down quite a bit. And even though they've been powering her up since, she's still not nearly as powerful as she is in the comics.
Indeed.
So from a writing standpoint, that makes, because if not, then, it's so hard to write anything for them because you have to come up with somebody even more powerful. And then the power escalation gets way out of control.
Specifically for the movie, for the MCU, because I mean, we certainly can't go into Volume 3 expecting that everybody knows who Adam Warlock is. That's not going to be fair of a general viewing audience. And so the way he comes into this movie, it's kind of like, well, I mean, are his powers ever really clearly defined? Not particularly. He's a dude who can fly and blast things. Is he completely immune from harm? Nope, not quite. But then he also doesn't die from anything that would have killed a human. So it's kind of like, it's all a little bit vague, and he's pretty dumb and goofy. So I don't know. It's a very MCU take on Adam Warlock.
I'm fine with that. I mean, he was an ancillary character anyway.
He definitely, which I wasn't totally expecting. But then, so of course, heart and soul of this movie is Rocket, and I feel like they did a very good job on there. I absolutely was willing to go along with the emotional core of this movie, and the High Evolutionary as the actual villain that is in this movie. I love that performance. I mean, abs chewing the scenery beyond chewing the scenery, like full on just crazy screaming, all kinds of over the top, but it completely worked for me. I was absolutely happy with the High Evolutionary in this movie.
So I thought one of my favorite moments of that movie was after, at some point, the High Evolutionary says, I applied some of my science to myself, and now you're like, it makes sense. Like, this guy is so vain that before what happened in the movie happened that spurned him to do that. Before that, he's like, why would I ever have to do that? I'm already perfect. And then he's reminded that he's not perfect. And then he applies some of his science to himself, and now he's perfect again. So it's an interesting take on this. I mean, this guy is at least as bad as Thanos. Like, as far
they made him a little bit more personal level, right? Yes. Thanos was detached from everything somewhat. And so this being a more like individual, personal, emotional level, and it absolutely worked for me. So overall, I really quite enjoyed this movie. This is certainly one of the stronger of the recent MCU releases. Worth a watch if you haven't seen it already, especially if you already like the Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't imagine you wouldn't watch
2.5 hours too.
Yeah,
It's a very, like, nobody in my family was having any problems. Like, I could tell my wife was not there for the fight scenes and stuff, but she certainly was following the dramatic moments. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of times in Marvel, that was one of the things I did notice about this movie. The fight scenes seem like they're like we have to have a fight scene now, so we're gonna. If you remember the first Avengers movie, where Thor and Iron Man and Captain America fight, and they get, at the very beginning, right? And at the end, Captain America says, "Are we done now?" And then they go back to the story. That's the way the fight scenes have started to feel in Marvel, and they definitely feel that way here. They don't feel, to me, not all of them, but many of them don't feel like there's much of a point outside of the fact that they need to have a certain number of fight scenes. Yes, we can't have an action movie without action, so let's have some more action. If you look at something like Logan, right, where the story is the movie, and the fact that there are some fight scenes in it is because it's derived from what's happening in the movie. That is a more organic feeling to me than what we experience in many Marvel movies now.
Oh, certainly mostly, yeah.
And even in this one, there was at least a couple of fight scenes. I was like, really? Like, almost everything with Adam Warlock was like...
Well, that's
like,
again,
we need a fight scene. Let's throw Adam Warlock at him for a second.
There wasn't a ton for him to do as a character saying anything, so... He's kind of crash and bash. That's what we're going to do with that guy.
And, I've got no real problems with it, but I do feel like it's time for Marvel to start to mature a little bit and have movies that are more like Logan. Not all of them. Not all of them have to be that way, but have to be a little bit more like that in that let's write a good story, and if it has a bunch of fight scenes in it, it has a bunch of fight scenes in it, but we're not going to just have fight scenes because we need to have fight scenes.
Good luck with that. I'm not sure that we're going to get to that.
So, I mean, this is a big thumbs up for me. I very much liked it.
As the final MCU movie for James Gunn for the foreseeable future, I think he absolutely served himself well, and this was a good send-off for all involved, and pleased with this one.
And not only that, I mean, I think that this is a great indication of what maybe he might do over at DC with the Warner Brothers. I'm looking forward to all the people who love Zack Snyder absolutely hating everything he does. I just can't wait for them to talk about how they've gone woke and broke while they rake in billions of dollars. It's always nice to see that. So very excited for that. I cannot recommend this movie enough. I certainly like you said, first one was it's very hard to beat that first one, and this one doesn't. But it is certainly very, very good.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right, let's get to this podcast, which is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Come to our website and find our show notes as well as our Flickr album so you can follow along with our pictures. Plus older episodes if you would like to. I mean, we've got how many are we on now? 873 will be this one.
Closing in on 900 pretty soon.
Yep, we're going to have to stop at 999. We don't have any more digits left in our names. Never thought we would get to 999. We're going to have to figure out what we're going to do.
We're going to go to -A, -B, -C.
Oh, we can't do that. All right. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can watch our live recording sessions. There'll also be the Flickr album photos will be shown there as well. If you want to follow along. I want to thank our listeners. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His handles at other social media sites is at First Reflects. I'm Tom at avrant.com. I am not on other social
Threads continues to improve little by little. You can now finally see a list of all the things that you've liked, which was missing when it first launched and made likes somewhat useless for the person giving the likes. But now you can see those. If you click on your own profile, you can see the things that the threads that you have liked. So that's nice. We need bookmarks so we can separate likes from things that you just want to hang on to and look at later. But it's all improving little by little over there at Threads.
All right. Just want to thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week. Do you support the podcast in some way? One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and sending us a PayPal donation. So we want to thank Ryan for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Ryan.
For sure, Ryan. Thank you very much for your PayPal donation. We appreciate your financial support.
We also want to thank our patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service. Sign up to be a monthly contributor to our podcast. We have 128 patrons currently. We want to thank each and every one of you.
That's right. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation, a minimum of $1 a month, or as much as you would like to, if you want to like recoup all the people we lost from one point. One person came back, so big thanks to our 128 patrons as of the time of this recording.
All right. I just remembered that I did finish Night Agent.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that next week. I wrote it in their parens so that you can
finish up Secret Invasion too, and we can talk about a couple of series next week.
Oh my God, Secret Invasion! I don't know if I'm gonna get through it or not.
6 whole episodes.
I know. I think I've only watched 3. I'll be honest. I'm 3 episodes into this thing, and I'm like, can we do something here? Can we pick this up? From the guy who just said, let's not have as much action and let's have more story. Too much freaking story. Can we get some more action?
Prepare yourself for not too much change on that feeling.
Don't worry about it. I ain't worried about it. All right. So we got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through, I guess, Canada burning down again?
Some of that, at least some of my area. We had BC Day here. We had BC Day to celebrate my province. So
did they burn down another province?
It must have started last night. That's when all the smoke started rolling in. So.
We also had a bit of an altercation in Alabama, I understand.
Okay.
So there was that. And then I'm sure there's a war still going on.
There's definitely wars that are still happening. Yes.
So. Anyways, Teemu sent us some notes of gratitude. Gurinder, who says he got around to watching Fall. He has to admit he didn't burst into laughter near the end, but he was trying to figure out what Rob might have found so funny.
I did let him know by email. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody else.
It wasn't that funny, but I was like, well, I didn't really. I mean, I don't think I would have done that. I mean. Dan Patrick says if I liked the Tour de France Unchained on Netflix, then I should check out Mark Cavendish. Never Enough, also on Netflix. He's sure I'll enjoy it. Mark Cavendish is a very famous cyclist.
Okay.
British cyclist, I believe. I believe he's British.
I don't know.
Toke and Shawn. So it's Teemu, Gurinder, Dan, Patrick, Toke, and Shawn thank you for thanking us.
That is right. I'll say the names one more time. Teemu, Gurinder, Dan, Patrick, Toke, and Shawn. Thank you all very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. They are certainly appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So in the news, there'll be a new streaming service launching this summer, and this one's pretty cool. NASA Plus. Come on, NASA. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to plus us.
Absolutely
you didn't have to do us dirty like that. NASA Plus will be free, no subscription required, and no ads. The goal is to simply make NASA's information original video series and live coverage available to everyone. You'll be able to access NASA Plus via the NASA app in iOS and Android, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and Roku devices will be getting apps, and they'll be available via web browsers. So, if you want to see all the great CGI NASA's doing in order to make you believe that we actually landed on the moon.
Nope.
Let me see if I got this straight. Let me see if I got it straight. Mm-hmm. Let me see if I understand the logic behind this. You think that there's been a grand conspiracy to cover up the moon landing for all of these years, and nobody would bring forth evidence that this conspiracy is true, no matter how much money is out there they could possibly make for doing. But you think for sure it's fake, right?
I like Neil deGrasse Tyson's latest take on it, just not trying to argue any of the validity of anything. He's just think about how much it would have cost to fake it at that time. The amount of stuff about the moon landing that would have had to have been fake.
It's cheaper to actually go to the moon. It would have been cheaper to go to the moon.
That's exactly right.
It'd be cheaper. I just keep trying to wonder. I mean, I'm just every time I look at, and I love conspiracy theories. By the way.
Okay, I do. Great. I do. Invite that by all means, Tom.
I love them because it's like watching people try to do mental gymnastics in order to explain away things that are so easily explained away by. Maybe it's just true. Right. It's just so much easier if it's true. I used to, back when the internet was new, I would go to like these message boards where people will post stuff about MK Ultra, which was a thing, but not what they said it was. And,
okay, yeah.
They were like, all these, like, let me tell you my story of how I've been hypnotized and now I'm a super soldier. Whenever I'm under hypnosis, I'm starting to have these memories. I'm like, you're the kind of crazy that I need to get drunk with.
If you had been subjected to a bunch of LSD, you might believe that sort of
There's
thing.
a lot. I'm not saying that they don't believe it's true. That's not what I'm saying. I think it's very entertaining. That's all. Disney has announced that in Australia and New Zealand, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 will be the last physical media release. There will be no more Ultra HD Blu-ray, Ultra HD Blu-ray, or even DVD releases in Australia and New Zealand. And whatever discs are still in stock at the end of August, that's it. There won't be any more. Anyone who wants to buy physical discs will have to import them. This is due to supposedly dwindling physical sales and the increasing popularity of online home entertainment such as Disney+. Let me be honest with you. There's barely more people in Australia than there are in the state of Florida.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that might be less true now because Florida is, I think, dwindling in population. But they... This does not surprise me. I mean, this is the direction we are all going.
I'm a little surprised at not even DVDs. That's a little bit surprising to me because
I don't think that as many people my wife went to the library and got a book on CD, and she came home. And she goes, "Do we have a CD player?" I'm like, "That's a question you should have asked before you went to the library." So I'm like, "Yeah, in our cars."
You got an Xbox?
Oh yeah, in our cars.
You can play it on an Xbox.
That's what I told her. I said, "You can go watch." Well, it's for my son.
Okay.
So my son is. There's a couple of books and she wants him to read them, but he doesn't want to read them, so she's trying to get him started on the CDs so that he'll be interested enough to grab the book and read it. And I don't know why she's doing this. This is like this is such an uphill fight. I'm like, why are you rolling this stone up the hill? It's like it's not even. There's no point to it. But she really wants it, so we don't have a CD player. I don't have a CD player in the house. She's like, maybe we should buy a CD player. I'm like, I am. She's like, well, they're cheap. I'm like, yeah. You're right. All right, back at CES in January, if you remember, LG showed off a 97-inch OLED with zero connect box. A zero connect box. The TV itself had nothing but a power cable, while the separate zero connect box housed all of the connections and used a wireless signal to transmit data to the TV all the way up to 4K 120 with Dolby Atmos audio. Well, it isn't vaporware. The new LG M3 series is actually coming to market, and surprisingly, it isn't expensive as most people assumed it would be. In addition to the 97-inch size that was shown at CES, the M3 series will also be available in 77 inches and 83-inch sizes. The 77-inch size even gets the newest micro lens array technology, just like the G3 series. The 83 and the 97 do not have MLA, micro lens array. Anyways, I don't know what that is. But anyways, all right. Physically, the TVs look almost identical to the G3 series, except there's nothing but a power plug on the back. Just like the G3 series, they come with a zero-gap wall mount. There are also Visa mounting holes for a third-party wall mount or tabletop stand. There's an easel-style floor stand available for a reasonable $1,500. That's
right. That's for the 97-inch specifically. Yes.
I'm going to trust an easel stand. The Zero Connect box has 3 HDMI 2.1 inputs, but they are apparently all capped at 30 gigabits per second. Visually lossless compression
yes,
is used to still allow 4K 120 with VRR and HDR. So
I mean, I'm hoping that's the standardized HDMI display stream compression, which is how you handle that stuff on computers and that normally, but they didn't specifically say display stream compression. They mentioned visually lossless compression, which is what display stream compression is. But yeah, it was a little weird that they didn't just come out and say the already standardized one. So I don't know exactly. But yeah, they're somehow fitting that signal into 30 gigabits per second. Yeah.
Yeah. The wireless signal between the Zero Connect box and the TV uses the 60 gigahertz frequency band with 5 milliseconds of latency between the box and the TV. The wireless signal requires line of sight.
It does.
The transmitter on the top of the box being rotatable so you can aim it at the TV, and the signal range is 30 feet.
Yep.
This is me giving you a side eye about that 30 feet. Let me tell you about that 30 feet. That's an optimistic 30 feet.
Yeah, I mean, 60 gigahertz signal, that ain't going through any walls. That's not going through your closet door. That is line of sight necessary.
How disappointed are all the people who spent money on this thing going to be when they find out they can't just shove the box in a cabinet someplace?
Yes.
And it still works, because that's exactly what's going to happen.
That is the thing. And I mean, there isn't even a single HDMI input anywhere on the back of the TV. So you must connect all your sources to the Zero Connect box. And you got to love that name, because, of course, Samsung for a long time has had their One Connect box with the single cord that carries power and signal from the separate box to the panels. Like, well, this isn't even a One Connect box. It's a Zero Connect box because it's fully wireless.
Next one's going to be -1.
That's right.
Box.
But like
You're gonna have to give us a connection back.
All the processing and everything is in the separate box. So I don't think you can even like do any streaming on the TV by itself without the Zero Connect box. Sure. All of the alpha processing is inside of that separate box, the Zero Connect box. So yeah.
All right, the prices have been announced, with the 77-inch at $5,000, which is just $500 more than the 77-inch G3. Mm-hmm. The 83 is at $8,000, which is $1,500 more than the 83-inch G3. And the 97-inch is at $30,000, which is $5,000 more than the 97-inch G2.
Yes, and the G2 just remained in the lineup for this year, so staying at $25,000. So yes, quite the price jump from 83 inches to 97 inches. A massive price delta there. To go full
I think
wireless.
it's a fine technology demo or whatever, but I mean, come on. What's the use case scenario for this thing? Like, who is...
A little bit, yeah.
The line of sight is like, it's a deal killer. You might as well just have a cable, but I mean, the line of sight is a deal killer. I mean, they absolutely should have come up with a solution that allowed you to. It must be close, like in the furniture right below it, but it didn't have to be a line of sight.
That might work, but yeah, I mean, 60 gigahertz. That is a high frequency that is easily disrupted by any sort of something getting in the way of that. So
for those of you that aren't like kind of up on your wireless frequency range things, the bigger the number, the shorter the range,
the shorter the wavelength.
Yeah, but the short, the closer you need to be to it usually, and the more susceptible it is to interference by physical barriers and other things.
You know, similar to when we were talking about sound frequencies and like the low bass frequencies with the long wavelengths just wrapping around objects in the room because the wavelength is considerably longer than the obstruction. I mean, now we're into radio frequencies, obviously, way up at 60 gigahertz. You know, the wavelength of that is so short that it gets disrupted by something being in the way, whereas a longer radio wavelength will, much like a bass sound wave wrapping around a physical object, a long radio wave will wrap itself around things and find another path to its destination. But with the very, very short wavelengths that we got here. So they do say like it's like multi-beam transmission to get up to that 30 gigabits per second, which would be necessary. So that's yet another like variable introduced into this where it's like, okay, what happens if like most of the streams make it and one of them drops out, you know, one of those beams just doesn't quite make it there. I don't know what happens to the image or the sound at that point. So yeah, I don't know. This isn't going to be the pinnacle of reliability, I wouldn't think. Yeah. So, I mean, how often is it that you have the TV where you want the TV to be, but then your sources are all closer to your chair, which is like how they show it in all the images, right? In all the images, they have the Zero Connect box like right next to the guy's seat so that it has the same line of sight to the TV as the viewer. I'm like, why is that where you're putting your sources is next to your couch? So I don't know if that makes sense.
I'll tell you who this makes sense. Oh, and I'm going to use "makes sense" in quotes here. Is for your single, maybe not single, but your gamer type who wants to have all their stuff right next to them, so they'll never have to get out of their special gamer chair, and they're able to plug, take their discs in and out, or control their stuff right there next to them, and literally nobody else ever comes into that room because it looks so weird.
Sure. And I mean, despite the promotional images, you do need a power cord going to the Zero Connect box too. So you've got two power cords to deal with.
They don't. It doesn't make a ton of sense that that type of person that I have mentioned would also be okay with there being compression of any kind.
Right.
Between them and
there's a little bit more latency added too, right? You've got the panel latency, which I mean, the panel latency now for LG's OLEDs is down like under 5 milliseconds, but now you're adding another 5 milliseconds for the transmission from the Zero Connect box to the TV. So I mean, look, we're still at 10 or slightly under 10 possibly, which is still very, very, very good, but nevertheless, it's like, it's just, I don't know. It's introducing the extra things that could potentially go wrong. But that all said, I am kind of impressed, like particularly the 77-inch, like the G3, not an inexpensive OLED television, but it's only $500 more for this whole thing. We were expecting it to be considerably more than that when they announced it at CES. So there you go. I'll give them credit for that much.
All right. Got some comments here. Karl, JVC issued a new firmware update for the current model lineup of projectors, the MP5 and Z7, 8, and 9. And Z7 and Z8 and Z9.
That's right.
According to their release details and his dealer, it's meant to reduce the time it takes for the HDMI handshake to complete.
Nice.
And also improve connectivity with fiber optic HDMI cables. But the update process is a bit old school, and it requires you to download the new file on your computer, transfer it to a USB thumb drive, and plug that into your projector. Unfortunately, Karl has seen several user reports of JVC projectors bricking themselves during the update with no solution other than a full repair or replacement. One issue seems to be that the projector's USB connection is only compatible with the old FAT32 file system. So it's apparently important to limit the storage size of a USB stick so that you use for the file transfer. It's important to limit the storage size of the USB stick that you use for the file transfer, and you have to make sure it's to properly format the drive before attempting to use it, because the FAT32 does not allow you to use one of these massive
huge multi-terabyte drives, and like the modern file system is, usually NTFS or exFAT now. So it's like, it's the older file system. I think, like 8 or 16 gigabytes or something like that. Yeah, it's like the biggest size that it went to, something in that realm. So it's like you got an old USB stick because that's what you're going to want to use if you're trying to do this firmware
that
update.
One that when your kid asked for one for school, you're like, oh, you can take this one. I'm never using this old
years ago.
Crap again. For his NZ9, Karl is going to have his dealer do the firmware update for him. Why take a chance? I wonder did he mention how much that was going to cost him? It shouldn't. Doesn't feel like it should cost him.
I don't know. I mean, it'll depend on the dealer that you have and what they do for free and what
whether
they
or not
charge
you require them to come out. If you just bring the projector into them, you could be like, if I was the dealer, I'd just be like, just plug it in.
For a $26,000 projector, hopefully they would do a firmware update for you, but one never knows. It would depend on the exact relationship.
All right, let's get to our questions here. Vasanth in India. Vasanth had a 7.1 setup with an Epson 5030 UP projector in a dedicated room. He started doing a bit of renovation, repainting of that room. So in the meantime, he took his Wharfdale speakers and Polk OMW3 overheads out to his living room and created a surround sound setup there with the Sony TV. His wife had always complained about his home theater before. She said it was too loud, and they only ever used it maybe once a week. She also hated using his Yamaha receiver, and since it was old and limited to 7.1, he went ahead and upgraded it to a Denon X3700H. While they had everything set up in the living room, he was not able to do any acoustic treatments, and there was nowhere to put his Polk subwoofer. So the living room became a 5.0.4 configuration. It was their first time using Odyssey. Now the fun and funny part. To his surprise, for the first time he can recall, he came home from work one day and found his wife rocking out with music blasting in the living room. His entire family started watching movies and TV with their surround sound system on, and this was daily. And the most unbelievable of all, when his theater room was finally done and painted and he was ready to move everything back in there, he actually got in a fight with his wife because she didn't want him putting the old Yamaha receiver in the living room. He still wants the dedicated theater because he wants a subwoofer in his projection setup, but now he's thinking he'll need to get a second X3700H because his wife won't let him take it out of the living room. You have first world problems, my friend. So what am I looking at here? Is this the living room?
This is the living room setup that he did temporarily. No subwoofer in there, which is fair enough, but he managed to put the X3700H receiver in there and create a 5.0.4 configuration. And I must say, those rear height speakers and those surrounds that are mounted on the back wall, they're pretty darn close to each other. But
I was going to say.
He never intended for this to be the permanent thing. He's like, while the theater is out of commission, I'm going to enjoy this as best I can in a living room setup. Perfectly fair enough. He did a nice job like hiding all the cabling. It's not
so too.
The wire runs aren't invisible because he used a little bit of like the wire track system in there, but it's certainly it's blended in there. It's nicely camouflaged, if not outright invisible. So did a nice job, and like. That's probably why his wife wouldn't mind keeping it there, because it didn't make it into a total eyesore like it obviously could have been if it had just been wires draped all over the place or something.
I'll be honest with you. I'd take those rear heights and just nix them.
Yeah,
I might nix the front heights too and just have a 5.0.
Sure, yeah, because I wonder how much your wife and kids are actually like, it's the overhead speakers making all the difference as opposed to we actually have a surround sound system in the living room
now.
So
you can save some money that way by just taking those overhead speakers out of there and just leaving it at a 5.0.
Yeah.
And
you could get a new Denon receiver, which will function like, as far as how you use it on the remote control and stuff, it'll work exactly like the X3700H, but you could get a much less expensive model for the living room. That's what I would suggest. You move the 3700 into the theater room, move these overhead speakers into the theater room, and then get a lower, more entry-level Denon that doesn't have quite all the features, but that they don't care about. But you can save some money that way instead of buying a second 3700H. He says, okay, what made a difference in that his wife actually wants the full surround sound? What he's asking, what made it such a difference that his wife actually wants the full surround sound set up in his living room? Was it Odyssey? Was the lack of a subwoofer? Was actually the lack of acoustic treatments in there? So, obviously speculation from us because we didn't hear before and after. But
we don't know how your theater sounded. We don't know what whatever. So this is what I'm going to say. First of all, I don't think it's Odyssey. I don't think it's a lack of acoustic treatments.
Yeah.
I think it's placement, basically. It's taking it out of the dedicated room and putting it into another room. And then more than likely, for whatever reason, she connected it a little bit more with how to control it.
Sure.
Or maybe she just cared enough because it was there next to her, and she spent. I'm telling you, my wife is like, I don't understand how to control this stuff. I'm like, why? It's like dead simple. She's like, well, I never touched the remote. I'm like, I hand you the remote all the time, and you hand it back and tell me to do stuff. So she's, my wife doesn't know how to control everything. She's a civil engineer.
Right.
She's perfectly capable of figuring this out. In under 5 minutes, she could figure I could leave this house and she could figure this out for herself. Your wife is probably the same, but she's never had a need or desire to. But you're not in the house maybe, and she wants to listen to some music. She's like, well, I'll press some buttons and see what happens. And she figured it out. So now that she knows how to do it,
right, she's
gonna, there's like sort of like that barrier to entry, but once you're in, you cross. It's not that much more to learn. So I think the lack of subwoofer may have helped a bit.
I think there could have been an effect with the lack of subwoofer for sure, because he did mention in the theater it was one subwoofer. It was a single subwoofer.
Right.
I'm betting that you, Vasanth, took the primary seat most of the time, and your wife was probably sitting to your left or right, or maybe on a seat that's on the side or something like that. So the experience of the bass might have been substantially different from what you were hearing in the main seat versus what she was hearing in even just a seat directly to your left or right. That could be a possibility. We would not be shocked at all in a single subwoofer setup, that being the case. Even if the sound from seat to seat wasn't that drastically different, we don't know exactly how the subwoofer was integrated before. So, I'm just, again, total speculation, but the possibility of a single subwoofer in a setup sounding boomy, overbearing, just being like, it's kind of like, it's not that pleasant to listen stuff in here, certainly not out of the question. And you remove that entirely from the system, you don't have what might have been overly boomy bass quite often that she was experiencing in the dedicated theater room. You take that out of the equation, and suddenly it's like, it wasn't literally sheer volume that was the problem, that she enjoys listening to music loud in the living room. It was that, yeah, there was like some kind of unpleasant blend between the speakers and subwoofers, at least in the seat where she was sitting, which is certainly within the realm of possibility. So out of all the things that were guessed at, that would be the one where it'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. You know, like the odds that Odyssey versus YPOW, like you're going to take Odyssey, you know, the plan for sure is to have Odyssey in your dedicated theater now. I don't think it's that if you put everything back exactly the way it was and all you swapped out was the Yamaha receiver for the Denon.
She's not coming back in there.
That, you know, either of you would notice some kind of gigantic difference just because of YPOW versus Odyssey. I definitely wouldn't think that. Yeah. You know, could the lack of room treatments? No, I mean, not that can't make an audible difference, but I don't think that's the reason someone would suddenly prefer the setup in the living room versus the way it was set up in the dedicated theater. So if I had to guess at anything, I think it was probably the subwoofer.
Yeah, and I along those same lines, I would consider before you start setting up the theater room again, I would make a dedicated plan to ensure that your wife's experience in there is the same as yours. That's going to involve room treatments and dual subwoofers, almost certainly.
Yeah, I mean, he's already got the acoustic treatments going. So I think the big upgrade here for the theater would be getting a second subwoofer. I mean, he was saying, you know, it's a Polk subwoofer that he's got for the theater. I mean, not my favorite, not terrible, but not my favorite. So, I mean, sure. if there's another upgrade to be coming, a pair of new subwoofers, you know, nicely matching pair of subwoofers that you can place across the room from each other in that dedicated theater. I would absolutely, if your wife is happy in the living room, leave it the heck alone.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go change. Although, like we said, removing the overhead speakers, I don't think is going to make any difference whatsoever to everybody else's experience. So I would go ahead and bring those back into the theater. But yeah, I would leave, you know, as a 4.0 system for sure in the living room. That's what I would do. But back in the dedicated theater, I think if you get to the point where you have the budget to make a substantial upgrade, it would be adding a pair of dual subwoofers, setting them across the room, and focusing on getting that nice uniformity across all the seats, including where your wife sits. And then she might go, oh, it's so much nicer in here, and actually like to come and watch movies with you in there.
And if she doesn't,
right,
or if
you've still got the living room now.
You've still got the living room.
Yeah.
I also would make sure that you aren't tuning the bass in such a way as to make it to your taste and not necessarily
big bass boost. Yeah,
to her taste. Like if you're, like we talked about with the Harman curve, if you've bought into that Kool-Aid and have decided that, you know, you need to have that big bass boost, I would tune it to flat and actually have it be a little bit more subdued in the bass at first, you know, in order to encourage her to spend more time in there or to like it. And then you can start like easing it up a little bit if that is your taste. But, you know, gives it some time. Lastly, he asks, he can't afford to buy another 3700H receiver immediately. We kind of talked about that, touched on it already. But he was looking at his features where you can set it to a dedicated preamplifier mode where all of its internal amps get powered off. And you can also have it memorize 2 completely separate speaker configurations. Could he actually keep the 3700H in the living room and have it power the setup in there? And then you could have a separate amplifiers and speakers in the dedicated theater, but the 3700H could still control everything in the theater from the living room. They wouldn't be on simultaneously. So the idea here, if I'm understanding him, is that he would have the internal amps power the speakers in the living room
and exactly as it is now, and that would be speaker preset number 1. Yeah,
and then he would have speaker preset number 2, which is everything's on the amplifier, and that amplifier is then external amplifier, and all those speakers are in the other room.
Yeah,
you of course then have to have 2 different Odyssey settings or configurations because each room would be different.
And that would also get saved to preset 1 and preset 2 separately.
Yeah, it's certainly doable. The problem is, I don't see why you can't do that. I don't see any reason why you couldn't.
Theoretically possible. Or not just theoretically. It is possible to do what you've proposed. The issue is, are you really sure that like when you're in the theater, there is never going to be a situation where someone wants to turn on the system in the living room? Because you cannot have both speaker presets active simultaneously. That is absolutely not possible to do. So it very much would be either the living room system on speaker preset number 1 or the dedicated theater on speaker preset number 2. You absolutely could never have them going at the same time. So given that, and then considering you would need to buy all external amplification for one of the setups. I
think it's going to be way cheaper just to buy a
second 5.1 or 7.1 Denon receiver that will just handle the living room. Not to mention all the wires that are going to have to be run in some form, right? Like if you run all the pre-out connections from the X3700H to an amplifier that lives inside of the dedicated theater, well, that's all of those RCA cables, 11 of them, or 9 of them in your case, plus the subwoofers as well. So now we're back up to 11. So 11 RCA cables running from the living room to the theater, or you keep the amplifier in the living room, but then you have to run all the speaker wires from the amplifier into the dedicated theater. So either way, you've got a mess of cables running from the living room to the dedicated theater versus, you were going to have to spend money on a bunch of external amplifiers if you do it this way. I guarantee you can get a 5.1 or a 7.1. I mean, right now, we know the S760 H is on sale because the S770H just came out. So you could absolutely go pick up a S760H from Denon and have that power your living room setup, just like we talked about. I'm almost certain that would be less expensive than whatever external amplification you'd have to buy to make this setup. And now you don't have wires
even
having
with
to go
those new
between
monolith
the two rooms.
amps that we just talked about, you're still going to end up getting there pretty quick.
And now you could use both systems simultaneously. So I think all of the value there is just getting a less expensive AV receiver that powers just the living room. And I absolutely don't think anybody is going to care if you do not have 4 overhead speakers in the living room. They will be absolutely fine without those.
Yeah. And, the lower versions of Odyssey will be just fine in there as well. I doubt that Odyssey's doing that much to begin with.
No, it's not that. It's not that.
Alan wrote us last week with the Smash TV screen when his 4-year-old threw a temper tantrum. Does that child still live with you? I thought.
There's an update on that. Yeah.
He wanted to go big for a 77-inch OLED upgrade, but he followed some of our old advice and made a cardboard cutout to estimate the size on the wall first. His wife immediately vetoed the 77-inch size, but 65 inches was okay. That's still a screen size upgrade, and more affordable. So he picked up a 65-inch C2 OLED.
Well, congratulations. That is still an excellent, very wonderful looking TV.
So the 4-month-old has now been punished with 1 month of no 4-year-old, has been punished with 1 month of no TV or tablet screen time. I don't think that's going to do anything, but whatever. Let me tell you something. I mean, I have traveled around the world with my children.
Yeah.
And they spent years in Australia. Years in Australia, right? And the oldest one, the one who was like in 3rd grade when we left, you know how much he remembers of Australia? Only what I tell him. And he tells it back to me as if it's his own memories. I'm like, that's the way I described that. That's not how it actually happened. So, good luck with that, but whatever. I'm sure it makes you feel better. That's how long it'll take them to recoup the money for the new TV, so it seems fair. Turns out enforcing this punishment feels more like the parents, are the ones being punished. Exactly. Your child this is the problem with our kids. Do not understand. They're like, you guys are so mean, you punish me. Like, I am suffering way more than you. You think it's bad now? Wait till you take their their driving privileges away. They're like, oh, it sucks, I can't drive anywhere. We're like, oh my God, it sucks, you can't drive anywhere. Can you stop screwing up so that I can have you drive your brothers to places or pick up the groceries or do whatever? Because now I can't do any of that because you're punished and I have to pick you up everywhere. You can't even drive yourself to and from school or to and from your sports stuff anymore. It's miserable. Believe me, you have not invented this. And I'm going to be honest with you, as much as I am, for, making sure that kids learn their lesson or whatever, this child is not learning their lesson. They don't even remember. They don't remember what they did, and you're not even, you can mention it 1,000 times and they're never going to learn it. So, children, to me, at least with my kids, it's been very much like an ant, like a dog. right?
Okay.
When you have a dog and they do something wrong, if you find out later that they did it wrong, it's too late. You can't just grab their face and rub their nose and they're like, what are we doing? Is this a game? I'm not really sure what's happening here. You got to catch them in the act. And you did, and they got fussed at or whatever, and they may remember that moment. They're never going to remember this. His receiver is the first question here.
Yes.
This is so hot in here. I really expected my wife to come home and turn the AC down by now, but she has not, so I might have to go do that. Okay. His receiver is a Marantz NR 1506 Slimline. It has HDMI 2.0, but not 2.1. For his Amazon Fire streaming stick, if you want Dolby Vision and 4K and all that, does he need to plug it directly into his new OLED, or can it pass through his Marantz? Dolby Vision should pass, right? And the 4K should also pass.
It sure can. Yeah, you are fine plugging your Amazon Fire TV streaming stick into your Marantz Slimline receiver. It's not until you start getting 4K 120, which is really only the most advanced gaming systems and maybe a high-powered PC, that you have to worry about HDMI 2.1 and plugging those sources directly into the TV and relying on eARC to get the audio back to the AV receiver. In this case, the 1506 is old enough, it doesn't have eARC. It has regular ARC, although it doesn't really matter too much because the 1506 is 5.1. It stops at 5.1. It doesn't do anything 7.1, so you're never dealing with any sort of Atmos signals or anything like that with the 1506. But regardless, HDMI 2.0, perfectly fine for 4K 60. This is a new enough model that it supports Dolby Vision pass-through, so you can plug your Fire TV stick into your receiver, just like you always used to.
This HDMI 2.1, I swear to you, is such a not... Like, most people are like, do I need it? And like... Really, no.
High-end gaming is really the only thing that needs it.
Yeah, like, what do? I watch movies and stream. No, you don't need it. You don't need it.
You don't need it for that.
His current HDMI cable from his receiver to TV is just high speed, not premium and ultra high speed. Does he need a new cable? It's about 9 feet long. I mean, this is an answer that you will get almost immediately when you plug it in.
Sure. This is one where, I mean, just going by the numbers, if you're having your Amazon Fire TV send out 4K 60, then chances are you're going to need that premium high speed. You don't need ultra high speed. You do not need ultra high speed HDMI cables for anything in your setup. Premium high speed is the most you would ever need to get to. Yeah. Given that premium high speed copper cables are not super expensive, you can just order them from Amazon. The Amazon Basics is absolutely fine for this, so arrive at your door the next day. So that would be an easy.
I hate doing this because I kind of feel like I recommend Amazon a lot. I use Amazon a lot, but I recommend it a lot, and it's hard not to because
for convenience
it's
and
just
price.
Very convenient. The prices are usually pretty good. They're not always the best. As somebody who shops locally for a lot of stuff, I can tell you definitively that I have ordered stuff from Amazon. I've gone to a store and gone, it's cheaper here.
Yep.
It's cheaper here. But I didn't have to go to the store, number one.
Indeed.
And returning to Amazon is like so freaking easy. It's so, like no
They didn't do all that
questions.
stuff by accident, Tom.
Yeah. So it is so, but they are making it harder to return some things. That is, I have found that to be the case.
Yeah.
So at least with these types of cables and stuff like that, as long as you pay attention to the return policy when you're ordering them, it just makes sense to be able to just order it and just say,
I'm just saying that, it's not as though you have to budget for a month to afford a new premium high-speed HDMI cable or something. Like this is a pocket change type of thing. So like Tom says, if you plug in your current cable and you just start noticing that the signal drops out every once in a while, or you get sparklies and snow all over your image, you'll be like, yep, that's time to get a new HDMI cable. And it's pretty much as simple as that. I mean, if you do limit the output of your Amazon Fire Stick to 4K 24 for everything, then it's probably going to pass through the regular 10.2 gigabits per second high speed just fine, because it's the lower frame rate. But if you're doing it at 4K 60, then you might get some glitches without the 18 gigabit per second premium high speed.
So I think, is this lastly? Yeah, lastly, he asks, do we have a recommendation for rugged kids headphones? He's got a 4-year-old, we know, and a 7-year-old. He's bought them several pairs of $6, Five Below is a store, if you're not familiar. Five Below headphones, but they keep breaking them. That's because they're $6 headphones. He keeps getting the super cheap replacements because he doesn't want to replace more expensive headphones, but if some something upwards of $50 would last a lot longer and not get broken, that would be worth it. So any suggestions? First of all, I don't know your children. Okay. And I know there are children out there whose whole mission in life it is to break everything. That's right. What they do. They like to twist them and break them. 4-year-olds in particular, really, they have very little impulse control anyways. So there's, I've just seen them just randomly grab something and go, I wonder if this will twist. And it will twist for a while, and then it doesn't work anymore. So I don't know your children and how dedicated they are to the breaking of things. If it's just carelessness or whatever, there's a lot of things that could potentially help you out. You recommended what I was going to recommend because
it's amongst them for sure. Yeah.
I just reviewed the Puro BT 2200 plus children's headphones. Okay. Yeah. These are the big selling point of these is they are volume limited. Okay?
That's right.
So
they max out at 85 decibels. They won't go louder than that.
They won't go louder. So I gave them to my 14-year-old. He just had a birthday. I gave them to my 14-year-old and said, hey, test these out for me. And he immediately noticed that they didn't get very loud.
Indeed.
He did not say they didn't get loud enough. So he uses them to play games and to watch Netflix. He's burning his way through the bajillions of episodes of One Piece. Okay. So he's so I was like, can you hear everything? It's like, oh yeah, I can hear it. It's just not very loud. It could be louder, which I'm like, great. Like I don't have to worry about you damaging your hearing. But
and
these things
for
are
like a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, first of all, kids that young, their hearing is more sensitive than our adult hearing. That's a feature I would like to have. I don't want the ability to turn it up to 105 dB for a kid, which would be by accident, but I don't want that to really even be a possibility. So I do kind of like one that has that built in, that protection.
So I had the 2200 Plus, which are a little bit nicer. They're metal, the metal hinge. They have removable, very easily removable ear cups.
Yes, and they come with two sizes: one that makes it an on ear and one that makes it an over the ear.
Well, I think it's over the ear depending on which size child you put them on. So, the smaller ones are definitely small. I can put these headphones on my head. They don't quite reach low enough to my ears, but they're almost there. And they're fine. I mean, they sound fine. If you're worried about your kids getting a good audio experience, these sound good. They don't sound bad. Are they as flat as they could be? Absolutely not. But they are definitely
they're not garbage sounding like some really expensive headphones are.
And they're Bluetooth as well as you can physically connect them.
You can optionally wire them or connect them Bluetooth, which is nice because I don't know what you're connecting them to, but this will handle whatever you're connecting them to.
And I liked them. I liked them. My son liked them. They look cool. The ability to change the ear cups as they grow is nice.
Yeah,
and they are pretty rugged.
They don't look childish, which is kids don't like childish looking. But they still, if they have a favorite color, they're available in a wide variety of colors or just basic black or white so that, they look like perfectly adult headphones. And it is metal, right? The headband inside is metal. Yes. The hinge is metal on the Puro BT2200 Plus, but they are $99, right? So they're a little bit more expensive than what you talked about. But that's one that Wirecutter, that's their top recommendation. Tom's used them and liked them. So we're all on board with those. So if you are willing to consider $99, that sort of checks all the boxes you were talking about. If you're just like, no, $99 is definitely too expensive. Puro does still come up all the time as basically the top recommendation. They have just their Puro Basic, which is $30, so doesn't break the budget that you talked about, but these are wired only and they are plastic. So it is a folding hinge on there, but it's a plastic folding hinge. It's not metal anymore, so they're not going to be quite as strong and sturdy as the BT2200s. Wired only is sort of the main thing to consider there. But again, available in a whole range of colors, including just black. If they just want headphones that don't look like kids' headphones, they are available in just black, the Puro Basic. So that would be another one possibility. Then, just so that it's not Puro only, the other kids' headphones that get recommended all the time, including over at Wirecutter, are the J Buddies. So the J Buddies, very affordable. The wired only version, the J Buddies Studio is the pretty much the only model to really consider. That is wired only $15 for the J Buddies Studio, and then the J Buddies Studio Wireless, which again you can do Bluetooth or plugged in, $25 for those. So neither of those is breaking the bank. Now the ear cups do fold in, and the hinge that they fold in on is plastic again. The headband is plastic, but from that hinge to the ear cups is metal. So it depends on what part is getting broken that you're talking about with these headphones getting broken. But yeah, the Puro BT 2200 Pluses, I mean, they are the nicest, they are the most durable, but they're also the most expensive by quite a margin. So it's going to be figuring out what balancing act you want to try.
Yes. All right. Jared says he's been scouring the internet, including posting on AVS Forum, to try and figure out what would be optimal behind his false wall and acoustically transparent screen. His new room is at the beginning phase of just being constructed. The dimensions will be 12 by 19 by 8. His intention is to build a false wall 2 feet in front of the physical front wall. That will provide enough depth for him to visually hide his front 3 speakers, as well as a pair of PB2000 subs. Don't worry, he has 2 more subs at the back of the room. Okay,
there you go. I don't think you need that many PB2000s on the 12 by 19 by 8, but nevertheless, it's going to be pretty rocking.
Can you really get 2 feet? Is 2 feet enough for PB2000s? I'm surprised.
I mean, if not facing forward, certainly if you turned them sideways, they'd be
I was thinking about turning them sideways, but I'm thinking about, so I guess the back of the front wall and the front of the back of the false wall, the front of the real wall, there's a 2-foot gap.
Sure.
I guess it'll fit.
Oh, yeah. It'll fit in there.
But, yeah. Yeah, I think you're ordering too many subs. I don't care if you do. I'm just letting you know. With 2 feet of space, is there any reason he would not just pack as much insulation as possible? Thicker is better as far as being a bass trap, right? And having as much absorption as possible in the front wall should help with his SBIR, or speaker boundary interference response, as well, right? What's our take? I mean, so you're going to have a dead wall, basically, is what you're.
The front wall will be very dead. I mean, the immediate answer is price, right? Because if you could use less insulation, that will cost less. That would be the reason why you might not do it. But he's wondering, like, is there a performance benefit or detriment to just having 2 feet thick of insulation covering basically the entire front wall, except for where his speakers and his subwoofers live?
I mean, there's not really. I mean, I don't know that there's any reason not to do this, unless you're gonna be, okay. So the two reasons I would say that this might be a bad idea is if you're planning on putting lots and lots of absorption panels everywhere else in the home theater, in which case you could come up to the my room is too dead problem.
Yeah, like if you've got full wall-to-wall carpet with a thick pad under that, and then the entire front wall is 2 feet thick of insulation, then you also have panels on the side walls, the back walls, the corners, the ceiling. Like, there, eventually you get to where, you need... not that bass trapping wise you can really ever overdo it, right. But you might discover that you want to like start using those like the type of combination panel that actually has like a tuned membrane so that it's fully reflective to higher frequencies and get some of that back. But it all depends on what you were planning to do in the rest of this room. If you were just going to have 2 or 3 panels on the back wall, a couple of panels on the side walls at the first reflection points, and then no other bass trapping besides the entire front wall being a 2-foot thick bass trap, like that's not overdoing it. So performance wise, there isn't really a downside.
The only other reason I would say this would be a bad idea is if they would then said, since I have done this, I don't need to put absorption anywhere else in my theater.
Anywhere else, sure.
So then I would say this would be a bad idea. So not so much that it itself is going to be a detriment. It's just that you are now feeling like you don't have to do anything else. And the reality is you do. You still want to catch some of those reflections around the room. Yeah. Like I said, you don't need to like wall to ceiling everything all the way around this thing.
And at this point, we actually would be more concerned about the specific intelligibility reflections at the like ear height directly off your back wall, ear height directly off your side walls. We'd be a bit more concerned about that. Like normally we're like, look, if you're going to do anything and you don't have a big budget, bass trapping. And the specific reflections, except maybe the back wall if your seat is very close to the back wall, we're worried less about those than bass trapping. You will have by covering the entire front wall in 2 feet thick of insulation, done a darn good job of bass trapping this room. The overall reverberation decay times in this room would be largely addressed by that. And now we're more worried about just some specific intelligibility reflections.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the only thing I would say there is, performance-wise, it wouldn't be necessary to actually fill the entire 2-foot depth of the entire wall. If you look at the calculations of like where does having an air gap versus actual insulation start to cross over into like the air gap is getting too big, it's basically at the quarter depth mark. That's where you start to see any sort of difference. So if you did 1.5 foot thick insulation and half a foot of air gap, 6 inches of air gap, that is going to be less insulation for you to buy, and it will perform essentially exactly the same as 2 full depth of feet of insulation. So you could save yourself a bit of money there. There's really no reason to do more than 1.5 feet. And even if you did 1 foot insulation and 1 foot air gap, it's pretty close. It's not a gigantic difference in performance, but if you want like essentially no difference at all, it would be 6 inches air gap, 1.5 feet of insulation. The other thing I would just say is I would not want any of that, because like if this is the whole thing, floor to ceiling is insulation, I would not want any of that insulation being proud of the front face of your speakers.
Sure.
Right? I would want the front faces of your speakers to be ever so slightly in front of the plane of the insulation. So you might discover that you actually have a little bit of an air gap between the front face of the insulation and the actual acoustic screen, right? There might be a bit of a gap there, which is fine. And then a bit of a gap behind that insulation to the actual physical front wall. So we can save you some money there without affecting the performance. That's all.
Sure. Teemu. First up, Teemu is an English teacher and he wanted to offer us some praise. In fact, he wrote to say that he thinks our editing of our questions and comments is incredibly good. That would be Rob. And that he doesn't think he'd be able to improve our clarity and succinctness week in and week out himself. You're more than welcome to try. Rob would love some help with the questions.
Yeah, the time sunk in, right?
That must take time, he says. Mm-hmm. It does, which is why Rob would like help. So what made us decide to handle all of our incoming emails that way? He appreciates that we do so. Rob decided to do this. Okay.
Yeah, simplest.
The thing to understand is that the podcast was different before. It was a more casual podcast. Rob approached and said he wanted to start he thought that he wanted a podcast where that was answering more specific questions about home theater, and that was the type of podcast he wanted to listen to.
Yeah.
And he said, "Would you be open to that?" And I was like, "I'm not going to do all that work." And then Rob said, "I'll do it." And then that was like, "Okay." And here we are. I mean, that's the short version of it, but that is generally what happened.
Pretty much the entirety of the answer is all I've ever wanted to do on AVRant for myself is make the podcast that I would enjoy listening to. And I mean, I do mean I would enjoy listening to. Rob, wanted. And like, there's a couple of things that aren't my favorite about other podcasts. It's not like, oh, I'm going to stop listening to other podcasts because they do things this way. It's just like, it's not my favorite. And I want to make my favorite podcast for myself. So one was I wasn't hearing another home theater podcast out there that was like predominantly question and answer. Lots of other home theater podcasts have a question and answer section, but it's usually shorter. It's the shortest section very often in other ones. I was like, I want one that like, no, people can send their questions and we're going to actually like delve into it, not give a short answer, do a deeper dive, and that's going to be the focus. And when I hear people answering questions on other podcasts and they read the notes that come into them verbatim, I'm just like, I like it better when they edit those questions and make it like, read through. There's no fumbling over words that way, that type of thing. So it was just purely my own personal preference. And now I'm stuck in it. So here we are editing everything that comes in. Even when people complain when we edit it when it comes in, they're like, why didn't you just read my thing verbatim? That's what I wanted.
Well, and the other thing that you're not realizing is that Rob's not just editing it. He's actually trying to put it in my voice.
Some of that, I mean, we have enough years together that we have a pretty good feel for that.
Yes, but that is a conscious choice on him. He knows how I'm going to read stuff.
Sure.
So he tries to put it in that voice so that it flows out of my mouth even easier. So I mean, he is doing a lot of work on that. So yes.
Oh yeah, there's time involved, and it's also like, again, a thing I hear on other podcasts is sometimes they'll read the email as it was sent in, and then there'll be a question or two that was like in there in the language coverage. That just gets forgotten about because that, of course, happens, right? People, when they're posing several questions. So I try to give each question its own individual line. We go through them one at a time in an attempt to not miss anything. So look, of course, we still miss things from time to time, and we say, oh, we're going to circle back to that, and then we forget to do so. That still happens. We still stumble over words sometimes. It's inevitable, but all of it was, purely of that. That's what I wanted to do. That's
there
what
you
it
go.
came down to.
Second, Teemu also appreciated our thoughtful response to his question last week about his front 3 Kevlar 100 speakers, one of which broke, requiring either a new center, a new front left and right pair, or both. After listening to our advice, he found a closeout deal at a local retailer for a Kef R2C, not Meta, center speaker, audibly, functionally, probably identical.
Because there is an R2 Meta, so this was one generation before that.
It still came with a 5-year warranty, and he got it for €600, which is half price from when it was brand new. Despite being one model generation apart, guess what? It pairs beautifully with his R100 bookshelf speakers, and since he sits about 8 feet away and rarely has his master volume above -15, he doesn't have any concerns about needing higher output capabilities.
Indeed.
When he tried asking around on the forums, which is, I can't. They surely didn't steer you wrong in any way, shape, or form. The advice he received boiled down to buy all new speakers immediately. Don't mix a newer model with older models, and smaller center will never do. So basically spend €5,000 instead of 600, or else he regret it.
That's right. We're shocked, I tell you. Shocked. We never would have guessed.
I can't believe that you didn't do exactly what they said, since they are always right. So the folks online seem genuinely excited and interested in helping. So why is that always the approach? First of all, they are talking out of their ass. Let's just start with that. Almost none of the people who answer things online, especially the people who say, I've heard those speakers before, they have not. They have not heard those speakers before. But they feel like they need to say that because they want you to listen to their advice. Believe me, if you're a guy who's ever been around... Is it raining? Oh, no. We're going to do this again? Okay. If you're a guy who has ever been around other guys and you've got a couple of beers in you, and you're like trying to tell... somebody tells a story about something funny that happens, and the next guy has to tell a story where something even funnier or something... Oh,
yes. The one-upsmanship.
This is what online forums are. And the way you win is they take your advice. That's the way that you win. And they don't really know. They don't have the experience with speakers that literally I have. Rob does as well, but I have almost 20 years of experience with different speakers. And I have tested speakers in a rotation throughout my home theater, and you would be shocked at how many speakers sound just fine together.
Oh, yeah.
Shocked. Different manufacturers, different makes, different drivers, different tweeters, different designs, ports versus not ports, all this stuff. They all work fine together. But occasionally they don't, right? Sure. But online, and I wrote an article saying, when best practices is not best advice or something like that. And the idea here is there are best practices that will absolutely get you a good result. If you had spent €5,000 instead of 600 and bought all new speakers, if you had
new identical front speakers, sure,
you would have been happy. You wouldn't have walked out of that and gone, these don't sound good. You would have been happy. You would have gotten something and you've been like, yeah, I definitely... don't regret doing this. But now that you've spent 600 instead and gone, oh my God, I almost spent 4,400 more euro to get something that surely didn't sound 4,400 euro better than what I currently have. Now that you've experienced that, do not ever try to share that online because they will absolutely shout you down.
Yeah, that Absolutely. The only reason you're saying that is because you're cheap,
yes.
or you're
and
poor.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Indeed, yeah.
You probably don't even own those speakers.
There's a bit, there's a bit of that going. I mean, look, there's the side of it which is, if you just give the maximal advice, then the chances of someone, if they follow that advice, being disappointed in the result is very minimal, right? So I can see that, like, on a purely genuine, I can understand where someone is coming from. If you're just trying to like give a 1-sentence answer to something, then you give the cover-all advice where it's very unlikely anyone following the advice is actually going to be disappointed by it. So that's fair enough if it's just that type of response. It's also much easier to spend someone else's money than your own.
Oh yeah.
So if you're just like, hey, spend your way to happiness, that's easier to do when you're telling someone else to do it. So I mean, look, going back to like the original question, and like so much of the way the podcast is now just having been truly me, not even Tom. Like, I wanted to make this podcast. Like, a huge amount of it was I kind of wanted to be a countermeasure to a lot of the like I spent a lot of times on forums. I don't spend as much time now. I just don't have the time available. But when I was younger, I spent a lot of time on home theater forums, and I just got fed up with a lot of the stuff. And I'm like, I want a place where I can give answers that I think are like more helpful. And as I always say, my absolute guidance and everything on here is like, I just want to give the answers that I would have wanted to receive if I were the one asking the questions. And those definitely were not always what I found on the forums. And the thing is, I would find 1, 2, 3, several people on forums that I was like, oh, they're actually giving the real advice.
Yes.
And I would learn those people. And when they didn't respond to a thread, I would be disappointed because I would see all the other garbage that was being put in that thread. And so it was learning to sift through all of that. But someone who's getting into it, I'm like, the amount you have to sift through, the amount of time you have to spend to like learn what your own filter is, and then the amount of like confirmation you have to do on your own to figure out what you can filter, like it's too crazy. So hey, come to AVRant. That's what we're here for.
Exactly. I also wrote, so I'm going to link that other best practices article, but I also Andrew wrote a stages of Reddit mastery or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what Rob's talking about. You know, there is a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy within these forums, online forums, wherever AVS or wherever you go. There's a hierarchy there, and there's a way of building yourself.
Tremendously knowledgeable, helpful people on AVS forum. Like, I learn stuff there all the time to this day because I don't know everything, and there are people who are experts in the field, and they really are helpful and know what they're talking about. So it's amazing what you can find there.
Like Rob said, throwing a newbie who has a question that that is a fairly basic question that they don't know the answer to. Right. They don't have the background, the knowledge, the knowledge base to be able to filter through is clearly a bunch of very bad answers. I am a member of a Facebook group, like it's Home Bicycle Mechanics, right? Mm-hmm. And I am now knowledgeable enough about bicycle maintenance where there are answers on there that are not only wrong, they are dangerous. Like you will break your bicycle trying to do what these people are telling you to do. Like, seriously hurt yourself or your bike or both. But they speak with perfect authority as if this can be the only answer.
And the AI is being trained on their answers, so it's all going to be great.
It's all going to be great. Fear not. The AI knows all. Ilango has an old Denon X4000 receiver on hand. He seems to recall it can do 3 zones. I don't know. Probably. It sounds about right. So is there a way he could use it to power 3 pairs of whole house audio speakers with each pair of speakers being fed by its own AirPlay source? So he's got 7 built-in amplifier. Oh, no. These are your notes, not the notes.
I wanted to make some notes about the X4000 because I had to look it up. So, I mean, it does mention that, yes, 3-zone functionality, right? So main zone, zone 2, and zone 3. But I mean, the short answer is no, you can't do exactly what you had in mind with the X4000. Right. So there are 7 amplifiers built into the X4000. It has 9.2 channel processing, so you could add an additional stereo amplifier to have 9 speakers all going in the main zone. But there is, of course, the amp assign, how all those 7 internal amps get assigned, and the only options available are 5.1 in the main zone and also powering zone 2, or 5.1 in the main zone and also powering zone 3, meaning that in either scenario, the other zone would have to come out of the pre-outs and go to its own separate stereo amp. Or it does have the option to do 5.1 and powered zone 2 and 3, but only mono in zone 2 and zone 3. So that's where, the 7 amplifiers, there's no way to make it like 3.1 in the main zone and then stereo zone 2 and stereo zone 3. It just doesn't have that configuration capability. So short answer is no, you can't have 3 individual stereo zones all powered by the X4000. There just isn't a way to configure it to do that. You could have all your sources plugged into the X4000, have main zone, zone 2, and zone 3 stereo all going. You would just have to add a stereo amplifier and connect it to the pre-outs for zone 2 or the pre-outs for zone 3. So in that way, it could be done, but you would have to add an amplifier to it. The other part he was saying was like being fed its own AirPlay source. I don't know if that was like AirPlay sources plugged into the AV receiver and each one feeds its own, or if you were trying to send 3 AirPlay signals to the X4000's own built-in AirPlay and have that go to 3 different zones. It only can take 1 AirPlay source. So
right.
You can send
have
an
to
AirPlay.
worry about with your zones. You have to worry about whether or not you can accept a digital or an analog signal or both.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times with zones, it's not very clear in the manuals. A lot of times you have to dig through it, but a lot of times you have to have a analog source because they don't do any analog to digital conversion, no DACs on those. Or I'm sorry, ADCs. So they don't do any conversion from digital to analog or analog to digital and back again. So you may find that your like zone 2 can take a digital source, but zone 3 can't. That sort of thing. So you're gonna have to. I'm sure Rob knows, but I'm just saying in general for the rest of you, if you start thinking about this, I'll just plug 3 things in this receiver and I'll kind of add an external amp and do this and it'll be fine. Might not be fine. Your receiver might not be able to do it.
Yeah, so I think that's it. I mean, you could have, I don't know, are there like plug-in stereo analog AirPlay source devices? That seems like a bit of a little weird thing. So I wonder if he was thinking, I'm going to just be at like 3 different phones. I can AirPlay them individually to the X4000. So you can only do one, right? You can do one AirPlay that goes directly to the X4000. It can feed that one AirPlay source to any of the 3 zones individually or all three simultaneously, but it can't do 3 separate AirPlay sources by itself. You'd have to have other sorts of devices. And for the Zone 2 and Zone 3 on the X4000, as far as I'm aware, those do have to plug in with RCA analog connections. Right. So I'm not sure
That's
does
why we
everything
like that
exactly
Chromecast
that
audio. Remember that Chromecast audio?
That was so lovely. I wish that had never gone away.
Yeah, which was like just did audio, obviously, but it had analog outs so that you could connect it to your AV receiver and add 3 of those, the 3 different inputs, and it would go for all of your zones. Yeah. There's ways of doing this, but you will have to have 3 different streamable.
Yeah. And then you start getting close to like, well, do I just plug each of those into a little Fosse amp and away we go, right?
And away you go. That's exactly right. All right, so he's having his 77-inch LG C2 OLED installed at the end of the month. It hasn't been unboxed yet. Ooh, I hate that. You know why I hate that? Because you don't know if it works. If there's any problems with it. Were the C2 units known to have problems with vertical streaks or banding? Are there some easy tests he can run to check and make sure he has a good panel? Usually there's test screens, right, on these things where you can put up like a blue screen or a green screen.
You can do the full blue, full red, full green. The vertical streaks, so all OLED panels will, to some, at least very tiny degree, have some barely visible vertical streaks if you go to like a 5% gray type of thing, sometimes in a 10% gray. It's down in the like low shadow area type of thing. So overall, once they got to the newest panels, the newest panel technology that they're using, they call it a WBE panel, and they use deuterium in there for the green signal, where it used to just be regular hydrogen. Once they started using those panels, basically that vertical streaking stuff got really minimal. So the C2 is definitely new enough, and definitely the 77 inches. There never were 77 inches that didn't use that newest panel technology. The 77-inch size came in at the same time that new panel technology came in, and that's the only type that's ever been used in the 77-inch and larger sizes. So overall, they were not known to have problems with that. Like I say, if you absolutely scour a full 5% gray screen, the chances are you're going to find one tiny little faint vertical strike somewhere. Like if you want absolute perfection, it doesn't exist. But in real content, it just isn't visible. So the easy test is just go to the built-in YouTube app that's built right into the LG TV, search for 5% gray screen or 10% gray screen. There's a gazillion of them out there, and yeah, you just put that up there, have yourself a peek. I would, before you go do that, take the TV out of any energy saving stuff that it has. So go through all the settings there, find anything to do with energy saving or automatic room light detection, all of that type of stuff. Turn all of that crap off. I'd throw it into filmmaker mode because that's going to be the most accurate mode out of the box, and then go to the YouTube app and do that test to see. But chances are it's going to be a clean panel.
I just can't. My internal alarms always go off when people are like, "How can I test to make sure that this thing is perfect?" I'm like, "It's not perfect. Don't do it. Just watch regular content, and if you don't see something, it doesn't exist." Like, people, and this is you too, honestly, Rob. People are like, "Oh, I was listening to a sweep, and it sounded like I lost a couple of frequencies here." You know what's hard to notice? Things that aren't there. Okay, it's easy to notice when your bass gets super bloated, or when like something is screechy, or something is distorting. You can hear that. You know what you can't hear? Things that aren't there. So if your speaker is a little bit inaccurate, but it just kind of dips out at one point, you're never going to notice it with regular content. It's not like James Earl Jones is going to start doing Darth Vader voice, and like every third word is just going to be gone. It just doesn't happen. So
but then you see it on a graph, and it's even worse than it sounded.
Oh,
so
my
what
God,
will you do?
Graphs.
What will you do?
There's a squiggle. It's not perfectly flat. You know what you need to do? Add smoothing, my man. Add smoothing.
Or nudge the microphone over 2 inches.
Yeah.
Get a different result.
Mike is planning to construct his own DIY projection screen frame and then attach acoustically transparent screen material. He's seen that most fixed frames screens include 1 or 2 bars that go from top to bottom in the middle of the screen frame to provide bracing. That way, the top and bottom of the frame do not bow inwards. So if he includes a wood brace running down the middle of his DIY frame, and his acoustically transparent material will be resting on the top of it, just like the rest of the frame, does he have to worry about it showing through the screen from behind during movies? No. I mean, unless there's a light source back there, I can't imagine.
Yeah, that would be, yeah. So, I mean, I guess the scenario is you're shining a projector on acoustically transparent fabric. You have no black backing. Yeah. The wall behind your screen is glossy white. So, therefore, light that went through the projector bounces off of the wall and comes back through the screen. There would then be the shadow of the brace in the middle of the screen and nowhere else. So, there is a scenario where this could potentially happen. What about, like, on your silver ticket screen that you have, Tom, it would have one of those vertical bars, right? So somewhere in the middle.
It probably does.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
So Tom's screen is not acoustically transparent, so that's one factor in that.
It's not, but it is sitting. So the wall
in front of a window, right?
It's sitting in front of a window with white slatted blinds behind it. Okay, so if the light were to pass through and reflect off and back into the room, I would notice that, and I would notice it. And in fact, I painted the wall gray, right? But I couldn't get the screen off the wall, so I can paint behind that. So behind where the screen is, it's still orange.
If and when Tom takes his screen down, there's a different color back there.
That screen is never leaving that wall as far as I'm concerned. Somebody else is taking that thing down.
But I was just wondering, like, the vertical bar that the silver ticket uses, like, does that actually touch the back of the screen, or there's like a little bit of a gap between the brace and
sure there's a bit of a gap.
Yeah, because in all the ones I've seen, there is a little bit of a gap between like the actual back surface of the screen and that brace. I don't see any reason why you couldn't construct your DIY screen to have, like, we're not talking an inch or anything, like, you know, like an eighth of an inch where the screen material is just not physically in contact with that vertical brace. I don't see any reason you couldn't construct your frame to be like that. Even that just means like using a slightly thinner piece of wood for the vertical frame if it's going in that way or something like that. So I would maybe not have it literally touching the back of the material, and then just make sure there's not some sort of backlight source behind the screen.
I would also consider going with some, I mean, I know you're making it yourself, but I would also consider going with something thinner, lighter, and maybe perforated. And you can definitely find, like, there's aluminum suppliers in your area. There always are. And I mean, you can literally go in there and say, I'm looking for something that's strong enough to, for this design. They love stuff like that. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they're a bunch of jerks. But my place down here, they're like, you're like going there like, this is my project and I'm looking for this. They're like, oh yeah, we've got something like that. And they'll pull some piece of scrap out and they'll cut it to size for you. You're like, yeah, just use this. So you make your wood frame and then you brace it with a couple of these, smaller, thinner, lighter, perforated, pieces of metal that don't have to be smack dab in the middle of your screen, and maybe you'll get two of them off to the sides or whatever. I mean, there's other options out there. You don't, think outside the box, my man.
Okay.
Dan is a professional AV installer, and he hates us.
I mean, he's a listener, so he's stuck around this long.
He listens because he's a masochist and he loves being mad. So he uses this as, I don't know anything about that. And has worked in the field for about 25 years now. He wrote in with some topics to rant about, not necessarily direct questions, but he'd just like to commiserate and get our thoughts. So maybe Dan doesn't hate us. We'll find out.
Doesn't seem to. I didn't get that feeling from his email.
So, it's not short, that's for sure. HDMI, so this is his first rant. He's heard us discussing the woes of HDMI CC and ARC eARC lately. He agrees it is maddening. Ever since HDMI took over in the early 2000s, it's been nothing but a headache for him as a professional. Like, dude.
Yeah,
and I hate to say it, but Harmony going bye-bye. I know you probably
that's coming up later, so we can save the Harmony talk.
But that just makes it so much worse because now you don't have a cheap alternative anymore. Ever since, it's been nothing but a headache for him as a professional. He has worked with mainstream equipment and esoteric equipment. HDMI has never lived up to its promise. HDMI is the equivalent of dudes who lie on their Tinder profiles. Okay, that is what HDMI is. It's nothing but lies, but it's kind of close enough to the truth where when you see him in person, you're like, I mean, he might be 6 foot. The
audio and the video do get there.
They get there.
That was the big thing.
That was the
one
thing.
Cable, it does carry audio and video. That was not a lie.
Anyway, and needing to use HDMI extender seems to be a recipe for complete failure. That is true. He also wishes there were a single HDMI person he could talk to about taking responsibility. If we are upset, then he just might be unglued. Okay, it's fine. And now he is facing many situations where there's a mix of 1 or 2 brand new pieces of equipment being added to an existing system of older equipment. That means some have eARC, but others only have regular ARC, and some have HDMI 2.1, but others have a 2.0 or 1.4. How do we handle the frustration of this HDMI situation? First of all, ain't nobody paying us, so I ain't got to be nice. Let's start with that. Okay? Yeah. Let's start with that. So the biggest problem with HDMI is that the marketing, and this is like the joke I made about the Tinder profile. The marketing does not live up to what it says. Okay, the performance technically can do what it says, but like you say, people don't understand that there's a huge amount of nuance that goes on there. There's a huge amount of things that can make things go awry, and not only go awry when you first hook things up, but everything can be working perfectly, and then something updates, and now nothing works at all.
Or, like exactly like you're saying, you add the one new piece of equipment and stuff that used to be working fine, and it seems inexplicable that everything was okay, and I added a new streaming box, and like we've been dealing with, now my TV is turning off at random or seemingly at random, right? It's like, I didn't do anything besides add a new device and something screwed up, and somehow HDMI is involved, and very often it's because of CEC. I mean, as far as like, there's no good way to handle this, because I mean, we can't like create our own connection standard to compete or something like that. None of us are in the position to do that. So, I mean, it's like, I'm sure Dan, if he's a listener of Cedia's podcast, right? Like they spend a good amount of time there. Because I mean, Cedia is directed at Cedia members, their podcast. Yeah. And I mean, they spend a lot of time talking about how like the importance of educating your clients, talking to your clients, because more than the physical limitations of HDMI and CEC itself, it's the expectations of the clients that are like, that's where the real issues come in. That's where the real frustration comes in. I mean, the thing is, I think you'll agree, I don't know how valuable the advice of, oh, you know, you got to spend the time to educate your clients. I'm like, they don't want to hear that. No. They're hiring you, the AV guy, to get their AV crap working. Yeah. Like I think that's more often what's going on there. So look, I don't know, how do we handle the frustration of HDMI? Not well. I mean, there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. So the question
really is how should he handle it as an AV professional?
Well, I suppose. And I mean, he's been doing it, so he's been muddling really through it somehow.
Need our help, but I'll tell you,
I mean, it's just to commiserate.
I've gotten to the point where when I work at the bike shop, which I do occasionally, customers will come in and they'll say, "Can you just fix?" No, I cannot.
Right.
I cannot fix just. Okay, I can either fix or I can not fix. You choose. Yeah. And fixing might be more than you're wanting to spend on this project, and I completely understand that. Yeah. And with HDMI, it's the same thing. It's like, I just need you to get my HDMI eARC to work. I cannot. I can't do it.
I mean, I can, but it might involve replacing a lot more equipment than you wanted to replace and costing way more money than you wanted it to cost. Yeah.
And it's not that I'm incapable of hooking things up properly. I am. I'm incapable of reprogramming HDMI, which is what is needed here. And because these devices don't communicate with each other the way they should, because manufacturers don't communicate with each other. And I don't think I published it yet, but I did write an article about that. Basically, the biggest failing with HDMI is that HDMI is not required to work across manufacturers.
Well, I mean, like, the CEC thing, letting every brand market it, trademark it, their own stupid thing, have some aspects of it work, have some aspects of it work only with their own brand of equipment. Like, all that stuff is nonsense. It's insane.
Everybody who gets mad at THX for being like super strict with their THX stuff, this is why they do this. Because look at the hate that HDMI gets. They get it because they are too just loosey-goosey with this crap. They should have standards, and there should be a testing board. Like, HDMI should have its own lab that says, send us your stuff, we will certify that it works.
To some extent they do, but yeah, it's just obviously not every permutation. No. It doesn't work. The only other thing I'll say on this topic is I genuinely believe that, like, the installers, the professionals, they know the full capabilities of what all this equipment can do.
Yes.
And like us, the enthusiasts, we get upset when the full capabilities aren't working to their optimal extent. I am convinced that, like, most clients that you're actually installing stuff for, if their immersive audio 15 speaker system was actually only making sound out of 5 speakers, they'd never know. They'd never ever know. I suspect that if you, like, didn't care about actually getting all the optimal features functioning, that the baseline functioning, the whole thing, the resolution comes in lower because that's lowest common denominator, right? You have 2 displays connected and it only comes in at 1080p, even though one of them is 4K. Like, the HDR isn't working, the variable refresh rate isn't working, the immersive audio isn't working, but the 5.1 is. Like, I'll bet that in many scenarios, the client would never know that they're not getting the pinnacle of the features. And if it's just audio and sound is working, they'd be happy. So that might be the other way to come at it.
Yeah. So second rant here is more HDMI. He asks, have we ever come across one company or even one piece of equipment that actually uses the with an Ethernet feature of HDMI? He has honestly never seen it used even once. So with Ethernet, the idea behind this, and HDMI's got a bunch of features like this that it technically can do, but nobody ever did it, so it doesn't do it. Okay, and with Ethernet, the idea was if one device in your HDMI chain was connected to the internet, every single device that was connected by HDMI with one of these cables that say with Ethernet would be able to connect to that, use that internet connection to do its internet stuff.
So you could have like an Ethernet cable or a Wi-Fi connection going to your AV receiver, and then your Apple TV and your television with its built-in apps and all that, they wouldn't have to connect to the Wi-Fi directly. They could just be plugged into your AV receiver, and it would all go through HDMI, the network connection. That was the idea behind it.
And the honest truth is, the only time I've ever seen that label on anything is on a cable. A cable that says, this is HDMI cable with Ethernet. And everybody's like, what does that do?
Yeah, because they did change the pins a little bit from the original configuration of the 19 pairs of tiny little pins inside of an HDMI connection. They did reconfigure it a bit for that with Ethernet. I vaguely remember one flagship AV receiver that I'm pretty sure was from Pioneer that had an Ethernet hub on the back of it that was like meant to work with the HDMI with Ethernet thing. Like, I vaguely remember that there was one piece of equipment. Now, it had nothing else to connect to, so effectively it was just as useless as everything else, but I do vaguely remember, and I'm pretty sure it was Pioneer Elite, they had an AV receiver that acted as an Ethernet hub on top of everything. But since there was no other devices, kind of useless.
I've never seen it work.
Right.
I mean, I
you
do
kind of need more than just one item.
Yeah, it just nothing else ever supported it. And some more HDMI rants. This is the third one here. He sent an article to us a while back to discuss the strange case of upgrading all the HDMI cables in the system to short, ultra-high-speed cables, only to have oodles of problems that either require downgrading all of the cables to premium high speed or inserting signal attenuators that to actually lower the signal strength going through those ultra-high-speed cables, making the cables much, much longer, also seem to get the system working again. At first, he was highly skeptical, but now he's run into this issue many times in his own work. The company that supplies most of the HDMI cables that he works with has basically moved everything over to ultra-high speed. Obtaining premium high-speed cables is getting harder and harder for him. Amazon. I know you don't want to do that, but whatever. Right. Yeah, I've got an affiliate link if you want to order a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
There you go. The biggest issue seems to be when HDMI extenders are in use. We have no idea how much time he has wasted on troubleshooting, only to find that downgrading the HDMI cables to premium instead of ultra high speed fixes the issues. It's madness. It does not seem to make a lick of sense. How can a 10.2 or 18 gigabits per second signals going through a 48 gigabits per second cable result in signal failures? We kind of covered that when we talked about that. It was
and I mean, I was just relying on the information that the people writing the article were talking about. It was that so there were two aspects, which is that the ultra high speed has a new equalization signal being applied to it, which is like boosting the signal strength for all intents and purposes. And then because it's doing that, it was actually clipping. The signal was now clipping when it went through some devices. So certainly something like an HDMI extender that's only prepared for the 18 gigabits per second or the 10.2 gigabits per second signal going through that device. And this was happening like when it was going through an AV receiver in the case that they were testing, which is another type of HDMI repeater or HDMI extender. That, because of the way the EQ is applied in ultra high speed, it was actually clipping the signal, and that was causing all of these problems. So that's why attaching an attenuator or having a way longer passive cable that just attenuated the signal naturally that way, it ended up just sliding under that clipping level, and then it was okay. So it's a bit insane that that's how it goes. But I mean, I guess somebody out there is going to have to start selling those attenuators, and then you can do things that way. One more thing to add onto the bill.
Sonos. He has had a lot of praise for Sonos. This is another. It's not a question from a person named Sonos. This is still more rants. He has used about every option out there, and his experience Sonos has been much better than everyone else in terms of the end user experience, ease of use, and just plain working the way you expect them to. Is there some reason we seem to shy away from recommending them? Is it just price? Because in his opinion, they aren't wildly more expensive than any of the alternatives, but they're easily worth it. And it's not just for whole house audio. Whenever a client expresses a desire for an easy-to-use Atmos home theater system, he thinks the best results are obtained with a Sonos Arc soundbar, one or two Sonos subs, which are engineered by Velodyne, by the way. I mean, Goodyear makes a bunch of crappy tires, so I don't tell you. And they make good ones too.
Yeah, I mean, those Sonos subs, they're not digging down to 20 hertz, but for the size that they are, they're kind of impressive.
And a pair of Sonos One surround speakers. As far as Dan is concerned, they're fantastic. So can he maybe convince us to consider their home theater systems more highly? I think that that's not accurate of our opinion of Sonos. I felt that way a bit too. My problem with Sonos is not that people don't like them. In fact, I think it seemed like recently we recommended them to somebody because they were looking for ease of use and for family members and blah blah blah. Soundbar sort of situation. I've actually got no problem with Sonos. I have problems with any product that locks you into an ecosystem that does not allow you to expand beyond it. And that's where Sonos really kind of gets me, as you end up in this ecosystem, and then if you're like, but now I want to get a full 5.1 or 7.1 or an Atmos system, I want to get, all of a sudden you're like, oh God, I gotta buy these weird amps and I gotta do this and it doesn't work with that, and maybe it doesn't work at all, and that's my problem. I agree with you, Dan, 1,000% that when somebody comes to me and says I want something really simple, Sonos. I've actually had people come up to me and say, I bought a Sonos system. Is it any good? It is. My immediate response is yes, it's good. The thing with Sonos is that the sound quality is very good, I think, or overall. I mean, for what you're getting as far as sound bars and stuff like that. I feel like the price is high, but not necessarily so high as to not be justified with the user experience. Yeah. And a lot of times people don't care about sound quality, and they don't care about getting the full frequency response and digging down to 20 hertz. They don't care about all that. They want to have a system that's easy to set up and easy to use. And Sonos definitely fits the bill.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we do a pretty reasonable job on this podcast of when we think Sonos is the right solution, we recommend Sonos. We're certainly not anti-Sonos around here. Definitely not. I think it's just maybe... like, there's going to be degrees, right? Somebody is going to be more gung-ho about recommending Sonos in more situations than we do. We're going to, fall somewhere, but we're certainly not anti-Sonos. So I think on the home theater front of it, I mean, maybe it was just thinking about one of the recent questions where we had a listener quite recently was saying, he's got other Sonos speakers in the house. He was looking to do, his first Atmos setup. He was considering Sonos, although the listener himself had kind of rejected it because of the price point. And then, I had mentioned, Nakamichi, for example, right? And so, why didn't we say, just spend the little bit extra money that it would take and get the Sonos system? So, I mean, part of that was, the subwoofers. Like I say, I think those Sonos subs, they are pretty impressive for the size that they are, but they're definitely not getting down to 20 hertz. They're not getting as low as the 10-inch Nakamichi subs, and that was one of the reasons I chose the Nakamichi system there in that specific question. And then, if you took the exact same budget that it costs for, a 5.2.4 Sonos setup, if you took the exact same amount of money and put it into a separate AV receiver and separate speakers and all that type of stuff, it depends on exactly what the performance level that you're going for, how that budget is best spent. But if somebody comes to me and says, simplicity of use is number one, I don't care about getting to 20 hertz in my subwoofers. I'm probably not going to have to, although it's really nice that Sonos can attach to wirelessly. I like that very much about their system. There's going to be scenarios where I'll say the Sonos immersive audio system is your best choice, and when that's the case, that's the answer I'm going to give. So I don't really think we're worlds apart at all, Dan. That's about it.
I think we're kind of a victim of the type of people we have listening and asking questions on this podcast too. We don't have a lot of people who are asking about Sonos system. They're asking about something more complicated, because Sonos system, frankly, pretty easy to set up. It's not that hard, which is the whole point. So they don't have to come here and ask for advice. And therefore, the type of people who come here asking for advice aren't looking for a Sonos system. So I don't know that we don't recommend them enough, or that we don't have opportunities to recommend them. Remotes, he says, he completely agrees that Harmony going away is a shame. They really were perfect for the DIY market. It seems to him like we're trying to convince ourselves that the Sopo Baton X1 is an okay replacement, but we'd like for us to consider an alternative. The good old universal remote has been rock solid for 20 years. Yes,
the brand Universal Remote, right. Which is it's kind of hard. It's one of those very generic sounding names, but there is a brand called Universal Remote.
My first remote review was of a universal remote, like an MRX something.
I've still got that MX 500 or whatever it was, very popular one. I've got one of those in storage somewhere.
They only sell through installers now, but they are less expensive than getting a full Control 4 system or a Crestron or Savant, of course. When making suggestions to our listeners, we shouldn't avoid the idea of going through a professional installer so much compared to banging your head against the wall trying to get an HDMI CC or Sofa Baton working all by yourself. Paying an installer to set up a universal remote solution or an IP-based total control solution is likely more cost-effective in the long run. Again, so can he maybe convince us to consider this alternative? I have literally said that the next time my parents' remote goes down, like when that Harmony remote dies, we are going to a custom installer. We are going to get somebody to come out there. And I've said it multiple times on this podcast. So not only do you not have to convince me, I am convinced. Because for many people, I feel like, and again, we are a victim of the type of people ask questions on this podcast. They want to save as much money as possible, and doing it themselves with a Sofa Baton is what they're interested in doing because there is no Harmony alternative. Or
it's the scenario like for myself where I am changing things around so frequently, like I like trying out all the different streaming devices and all that type of stuff, that even if I didn't have to have a truck roll and the person come out and reprogram for me, even if it's a call to an installer to have them reprogram something, like I personally don't want to do that with the frequency that I'm changing things around in my system. I want to do it myself. So is there a certain amount of trying to convince myself that the Sofa Baton X1 isn't all that bad? Like I genuinely feel that if you're focus on home theater and not trying to get home automation also working with it, I genuinely feel it's not that bad. So that's not me trying to convince myself. That said, I do hem and haw about recommending it to people because the programming experience on it, the interface on it, like there's a learning curve. There's a learning curve to it. It isn't dead simple to pick up and use. So yeah, there's a bit of a hesitancy there. So I'm willing to consider, like, again, it all comes down to the exact scenario. We get very specific with people's questions on here. When the scenario, I think it's right for them to hire an installer to do it, I'm going to say that. When I think there's another solution that is personally the advice I would want to receive in their scenario, I'm going to do that too. So I think that's about it.
All right. How much time do we have left here?
I mean, I think we can do just the last one. It'd be really nice if we could do it.
It's very long, though. No, there's two more.
Well, the last one can definitely wait till next week because that came in on the Monday. I just included it on the list.
All right. Toke in Denmark. First up, Toke's living room renovation is nearing completion. He wrote us a while back asking what we thought would be the best way to deploy his 4 passive on-wall subwoofers. We suggested stacking them in 2 pairs and positioning them diagonally across the room from each other. He followed our advice and he's pleased with the results. It was easier in terms of placement, less complicated for the wiring, and the base linearity was improved. So it has allowed him to stop worrying so much about infrasonics and not having a pair of gigantic 15-inch subs anymore. So
I very much like the way these look. He was able to like make the acoustically transparent cover on one of the subs into a piece of artwork. So it's very much like almost like a printed panel, except that it's a grill over a passive subwoofer that's above there. So that's very cool. I like it.
And honestly, these subs on the walls, they look a lot more like the top one. If you're looking at the picture here, does look like art. The bottom one looks like if you told me that was a heater, I'd be like,
sure.
Okay. That's
or like if he had wainscoting, it would almost like blend right in.
Yeah. As a broader topic for discussion, he's come across this description of speakers or subs sounding effortless. It most commonly seems to be used hand in hand whenever someone is talking about high sensitivity speakers with horn-loaded tweeters and huge bass drivers. They say that being so easy to drive makes them sound effortless. Or when enormous subwoofers are used in medium-sized rooms or massive amplifiers are connected to big tower speakers. Nobody is claiming to actually need the maximum output capabilities. They're saying that because there is so much headroom. Yes, because you can hear the headroom. There's just so much of it.
That's more or less what's being claimed.
Playing things back at a normal volume level sounds more effortless, it seems. Is there any truth to this? Like, as long as you don't drive anything distortion, are you really going to notice any difference? Whether your speakers have the ability to get 40 dB louder than only 20 dB louder, even though you're never going to need or use that extra headroom. It's bull.
This is the psychoacoustics of all psychoacoustics, in my opinion. Yeah. This one in particular.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, there is such a thing as these 2 speakers or these 2 subwoofers or these 2 amplifiers connected to the same type of speaker, whatever it is, played at the same playback level, have different levels of distortion in them. That is a possibility.
Sure.
That could be a scenario. There's all kinds of debate about exactly what percentage of distortion you need to get to before it is like truly perceptible, truly reliably detectable, where you could, without making a mistake, identify one or the other. And it tends to be a little higher than in distortion than our egos would have us believe that it is, particularly the lower the frequency frequency, the higher the distortion has to be before we notice any difference. So the whole subwoofer part of it is highly questionable, right? I have this 12-inch subwoofer that absolutely gets to the output levels that I need. Then I have this 15 or 18-inch subwoofer that obviously also gets the output levels that I need. But if I measure it, that 15 or that 18-inch subwoofer at that playback level, it really is 0.3% lower in distortion. It's right there. It's absolutely measurable. And it's like, all the research we have says that in the deep bass, you need to get like above 10% distortion before the humans can actually reliably tell that there was any difference going on. So, that's highly questionable when it comes to subwoofers. In speakers, the valid research on detecting distortion levels seems to indicate that it's much, much lower in a percentage-wise, but still probably more than you might expect before you can reliably tell them apart. So, is there any scenario where two speakers playing at the same volume level, all else being equal, that it's just the distortion that's making the difference? It's within the realm of possibility. But if we're talking about two speakers that neither of them has reached their output limit, neither of them is distorting in any significant way, the idea that, I can just tell that the one that does have more headroom available sounds more effortless, pure psychoacoustics. You would never be able to tell outside of a sighted test where right? You're looking at the gigantic speaker with the massive drivers connected to the 1,000 watt amplifier.
Right.
And both of these systems are playing at 85 decibels, well within their range. And you're just like, but that huge one, it just sounds so much cleaner. It just sounds so easy because the drivers barely have to move, and it takes like a fraction of a watt to get them to move as much as they need to. It just sounds so much better. Pure psychoacoustics.
It's hard to do, and it's sometimes impossible to do. But when I do reviews, I try very hard to know as little about the product as possible when I get it in. And the idea here is that I don't want to be swayed in my in how I review it based on the fact that I know the price, or I know some of the design choices, or I know
the pedigree of it, the history of it. Yeah.
So psychoacoustics, like what Rob is talking about here, there is all kind of bias that comes into reviews. But the biggest problem with reviews, audio reviews, is that there's an expectation from the readers that you're going to say certain things, and you run out of stuff to say.
Especially when it made no difference.
It made no difference. It's effortless. It's got so much headroom. Like I might have even said that at one point. It's this amplifier is effortless. Or no, the speaker, this high efficiency speaker is effortless to drive, which is technically true. Did I hear that? I didn't say I heard it. I said that it was. So I got to say something about this stupid thing. So I'm going to say that. And that's why when I do reviews, I really have, on my reviews now, I've just pared it down to like, this is what I actually heard. This is it. And like my listening sections are no longer pages and pages. They are like 2 paragraphs. I'm like, this is what I heard, man. I don't know what you want me to tell you. This is what they sound like. And most things, shockingly enough, don't sound that bad. And when they do, it's really easy to pick out, not from me, but from everybody else. Yeah. So,
this is a fair enough question, right? Our response to this, our derision of this, is not to the question itself, because I have absolutely seen this same thing that you're talking about, and he's asking about. He's like, is it true? What are they talking about? It's so common. You see this thing. Like, there's got to be something to it, right? No, the thing that there is to it is, I think, even more what Tom said than what I said, even more than the psychoacoustics. It's the expectation of, you have to say something about this. If I went from a 100 watt per channel amplifier to a 500 watt per channel amplifier and I don't say I heard a difference, like, how can that be?
First of all, they want their amplifier back. Let's start with that. They're definitely taking their amplifier back. Guaranteed. They may never even send another amplifier or another product to that website or that company to review. And that's a line you walk as a professional reviewer. You have to be able to say something about it, and you usually can say something. It's not that. It's like anything else, right? Even not always, but most of the time you can find something good to say about almost anything. it's possible. And then, you kind of do the positivity sandwich where you say some good stuff, there's one bad thing, and you say a bunch of other good stuff, right? And it's easy to say things in such a way where the reader attributes it to the equipment when you didn't actually ever say that.
Okay.
Right. So
get away on a technicality there.
Well, exactly. So let's say that you are doing your review and you get an amplifier in and you hook it up and, man, this thing's a beast. You talk about how heavy it is. You talk about how beefy the power supply is. You take a bunch of pictures of the inside. You take a bunch of pictures of the heat sinks or whatever. And then you hook them up and you talk about how you don't have to turn your receiver up as loud or your preamplifier up as loud as you used to because it's got all this headroom and it's so amazing, right? And then you turn your speakers on and it's driving them effortlessly. Look, I don't even have to put my receiver up that high. And then you do your listening session where you talk about how good everything sounded. But guess what? It sounded good before. Sure. It now also sounds good. But you didn't say that it sounded better. Some people do. They're a bunch of liars. They even lie. They might not be lying to you as much as they're lying to themselves.
Sure.
But they're hearing things they want to hear. Most of the time, there's just like, it still sounds good. So you just write that. It sounds good. Oh, everything sounds great. I just can't believe how effortless these amplifiers are.
Yeah, that's right. It takes quite a bit to make it sound bad these days.
I mean, I've had it happen. I've had.
Sure.
It happened, and I've actually I've had speakers in and I've liked them and I reviewed them and I gave an honest feedback about them, and then I got different speakers in and they were like way better. And guess what? That original company was not happy when I started saying, I liked them before, but these are so much better. They didn't like that, and that company no longer likes me specifically, and and some of the other people I worked with who allowed that to happen. So, there is things that you need to kind of negotiate politically for these things. But at the same time, it is an expectation that you need to say something.
But, for just the slight other side of this, right? We had that one listener who had the really large theater, right? Put in that like Sony XTZ projector in there, the $80,000 laser projector, because he really needed that amount of light output, and then had normal, very good home speakers, and they just and a Trinov system, right, with Trinov amplifiers, and then it just wasn't getting loud enough in his seat because he had the type of theater that's like approaching a small commercial size theater, like it's getting there, and he needed different speakers, right? He needed speakers that had more headroom than those excellent normal home speakers could offer. So, I mean, there are scenarios where they aren't equal, that you do need the greater headroom output. But if you're in a bedroom-sized room, it's enclosed, and you're thinking that going from these 12-inch subs to these 18-inch subs is somehow going to make this revelatory difference, it's like, that's just wishful thinking.
Every person who's got a bedroom with four, no offense to whoever's theater that was in here, 4 P2000s that are in the size of a bedroom.
Just imagine.
They're going to talk about how effortless it is, right? It's effortless space. Of course it's effortless space. You have oversized speakers. If you take those subwoofers out, if I took them out when you weren't looking and put in like 2 PB2000s or 4
2 monolith 10-inchers.
I mean, I could probably switch your subs on you and you would never know. You would never, it would still sound effortless to you because the effortless part of it is coming from you knowing that you have headroom.
That's what it absolutely is.
Yeah.
I see it, so I hear it.
All right, so we have one person left. Who we got?
Shawn is on the list. His question came in on Monday, but I included it anyway in case we ran short, but we didn't. So, Shawn, you're our first up next week.
All right, I want to thank our listeners of the week. I want to thank Ryan for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, as well as our 128 patrons over at patreon.com.
That is right. Thank you, Ryan, very much for your PayPal donation, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to go to sign yourself up to make an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 128 patrons over there.
So thank those who sent in notes of gratitude, including Teemu, Gurinder, Dan, Patrick, Toke, and Shawn. Thank you for thanking us.
Thank you so much. I'll say the names once more. Teemu, Gurinder, Dan, Patrick, Toke, and Shawn. Thank you very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We appreciate them. We appreciate everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.